G'day. Hi. Hello. This is Alt-Shift-X. We're here to talk about the season finale of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. What did you guys think of episode 6, The Morrow? This is a epilogue kind of an episode. This is a tying up loose ends episode. This is a looking back at all the wonderful and terrible things that happened throughout the arc at Ashford, and looking forwards to what's next. There's a hilarious scene with Lionel Baratheon and an uninterrupted stretch of 17 seconds. We get a solid 17 seconds of smooth jazz for the first time, which is exciting. We get a shocking scene with Egg considering killing his own brother Aerion. There is a heartbreaking scene with Sir Arlen, and Dunk makes his decision on whether to take Egg as his squire. It's one of the episodes that invents a lot of material that isn't in the book. In the book, there's only like 4 or 5 pages at the end of the story, and they vastly expanded those 4 pages into this whole episode of TV. Most of the scenes in this episode are invented for the show. In contrast, like a lot of the past episodes are mostly very faithful to the book. This one's largely invented. Spending more time with some of the side characters, fleshing out some of Dunk's decision making. And I thought it was a really wonderful episode. So we're going to discuss it all in detail. We will compare the show to the book. We will answer your questions, and we'll have a fun time. This live stream has no spoilers for future episodes of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, except for the spoiler zone at the end of this stream. You will be warned before we talk about spoilers. You can listen to these live streams on podcast apps for free, with no ads, using the Alt-Shift-X podcast feed, which is linked in the video description. We're also making scripted, explained videos about each episode each week. Like and subscribe. And also, my evil twin Alt-Shift-X made videos with Glidus about every episode of this show. And you can listen to Dunk Time number 6. You can listen to the whole series of Dunk Time now on Nebula. That is 18 hours of discussion about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Dunk Time is, in my opinion, a bit silly, a bit opinionated, a bit unprofessional compared to Alt-Shift-X. But if you'd like to listen to Dunk Time, it's on Nebula, and it's a good way to support Alt-Shift-X. All right, let's talk about the episode. Welcome to the live stream. Thank you for joining me. Let's get into it. So, as I said, this episode starts with 17 seconds of smooth jazz. And it's very fun and silly and sad. Dunk is sitting under a tree, looking like he is either dead or would like to be dead. And it's funny because, in theory, Dunk should be stoked right now. Dunk won the Trial of Seven. He won the first Trial of Seven in 100 years. The odds were against him. He was up against Targaryen princes and Kingsguard fighting for his life after he stood up to Aerion to protect Tanzil. And heroically, he miraculously survived. But he feels terrible because of the tragedy that's come from the fight. Prince Baelor Targaryen died. Sir Humphrey Harding, Sir Humphrey Beesbury died, and he feels the guilt and the weight of that on his shoulders. All of his dreams of being a knight and making some money and proving himself, it's all turned out to be a nightmare. It's all so much more complex and dark and violent and awful than he ever thought it would be. And he just can't even begin to process all of that. And so I think that they show us Dunk's despair and weariness and disillusionment and pain by contrasting Dunk's feelings with Lionel's feelings. Because Lionel says, it's been a wonderful tournament. In contrast to Dunk's utter despair and pain, Lionel is here going, oh, what a fun time. Oh, what a good party. Oh, a good time was had. I got to bop Makar on the head. I got to sing about Three Finger Alice, and I got extremely drunk, and I got to party with Manfred Dondarian. Wasn't that a good time? And so by showing Lionel's just glibness about it all, it shows Dunk's despair, I think. And I think it also shows Lionel's privilege, because Lionel is an incredibly rich and powerful lord from one of the great houses of Westeros, the Baratheons of Storm's End. And so he lives this life of luxury and privilege, and he doesn't have to worry about anything because he's so rich. Whereas Dunk is going to be feeling the weight of this for the rest of his life. Whereas Lionel is he's just chilling. He's just vibing on the surface. He's just enjoying life. While Dunk, it's all life and death. And so even after they've gone through that fight together, they've come out the other end feeling very different about it all. And Lionel is crushing on Dunk real hard. Lionel asks Dunk to come with him to Storm's End so that they can party together and sail and hawk and hunt and make merry. I love how Lionel acts as though he just came up with that idea on the spot. Lionel says, oh, you could come with me, as though he just came up with that idea, when I think Lionel obviously is like really hoping that Dunk is going to say yes. Lionel's acting all relaxed about it, like, oh, we could just hang out, why don't you come hang out? But I think Lionel is actually, he really likes Dunk and really wants Dunk to hang out with him and be his friend and give him a big wet kiss. But Dunk has bigger things on his mind. It's a fun thread in this episode that, like, everyone wants to be friends with Dunk. Like, Dunk is so unassuming and so honest and so straightforward, so uncomplicated but charming in his naivety, that just everyone inexplicably wants to be this guy's friend. Like, we see Raymond as well gives Dunk a big hug, and like everyone just loves Dunk because Dunk is so different to everybody else in this story. Dunk doesn't have ulterior motives. Dunk doesn't have these assumptions or prejudice or plans, or he's not playing 5D chess. He's the one guy who's just trying to get by and do the right thing. And I think everyone finds that charming because it's so refreshing. It's so different to everybody else. Lionel has a maester. The maesters are the healers and scholars in this world. And the maester tries to heal Dunk by, like, blowing sage in his face or something. And soon the maester says, oh, no, I can't heal Dunk. Dunk is going to die. It is beyond my abilities. And Lionel's like, nah, don't listen to him. This guy's a terrible maester. He couldn't heal an itchy arsehole. Don't listen to him. Begone, witch. And so it's very funny and ridiculous. You don't get to choose your maester in Westeros. In Westeros, like, all of the powerful houses of Westeros have a maester, and the maester is sent to them by the Citadel in Old Town, in the Reach. And so the Citadel just sends you a maester, and you hope that you get a good one. But you might get a good one like Lewin, the Stark maester, or you might get a shitty one like Pycelle. And you never quite know where your maester came from because they give up their surname, if they had one, when they become a maester. And there are characters in the story who say that, oh, you can't trust the maesters. They've got ulterior motives. They've got secret political machinations. Some people say that the maesters had a conspiracy to kill the dragons. Marwyn the Mage says that in Book 4. And it seems as though Lionel Baratheon has ended up with a bit of an inept maester, because despite what the maester says, Dunk does in fact survive. Baelor's maester Yolmwell has treated Dunk, presumably, so he's all right. So Lionel is just oblivious or uncaring of Dunk's pain and feelings, and is just saying, let's go on a date, let's hang out in Storm's End. It's very, very similar to Robert Baratheon's behavior, Because Robert Baratheon also likes to hunt and hawk and drink and train at combat, and those are the same exact things that Lionel suggests that he and Dunk do. So Lionel is behaving so much like Robert Baratheon does. The difference is that the one thing Lionel says that Robert doesn't say is that Lionel says, "Oh, we'll go sailing." Robert does not like sailing, and I think the reason for that is that Robert's father Stefan died in a shipwreck in Shipbreaker Bay. So it seems as though the death of Stefan has made the Baratheons less enthusiastic about sailing. So Lionel says that it's boring at home and he wants to hang out with Dunk as entertainment. So Lionel is not the Lord of Storm's End. He's not the leader of House Baratheon. The books don't say whether Lionel is the heir to Storm's End or if he's a lesser lordling, but, later in the books he does eventually become the Lord of Storm's End. But for now, Lionel seems to be just living a life of leisure, which sounds delightful. He just sort of bums around, goes to parties, goes to tournaments, tries to start wars, perhaps. Because that's the other interesting thing that Lionel says. He says that there's a war coming. And he says the only good dragon is a dead dragon. Because Dunk is feeling terribly guilty that his trial caused the death of Prince Baelor. Because Baelor was a good leader. He was heir to the throne. He would have been a great king. But Lionel says, nah, it's good that Baelor died. Lionel hates Targaryens. The only good dragon is a dead dragon. And again, that's very similar to Robert Baratheon in Game of Thrones. In the show, Robert Baratheon says, "I'll kill every Targaryen I get my hands on." So there is a long-lasting beef between the Baratheons and the Targaryens. Although the first Baratheon, Orys Baratheon, was the alleged half-brother of King Aegon the Conqueror. The Baratheons have Targaryen blood and have intermarried with the Targaryens multiple times. That's part of Robert Baratheon's claim on the throne, is that he has some Targaryen blood, but here Lionel hates the Targaryens and kind of wants to do a little rebellion. He says, "We'll be a force, you and I." He wants Dunk to join his rebellion. So is there a rebellion against the royal family coming? 13 years ago, there was the Blackfyre Rebellion against the Targaryens, and there are still some Blackfyre sympathizers kicking around, so this political discontent is interesting. This isn't in the book. This idea of Lionel being a rebel is not in the book. But 70 years from now, Lionel's descendant Robert does defeat the Targaryens in Robert's rebellion and takes the throne. So it feels like a little foreshadowing of that, if nothing else. Lionel also mentions Tarth, which is a beautiful island near Storm's End, near Lionel's homeland. And Tarth is where Brienne comes from. And there are lots of similarities between Dunk and Brienne. They are both true knights who believe in the values of knighthood, but Dunk and Brienne are also technically not knights, because Brienne is a woman, and Dunk, it seems, was not knighted by Arlen, hasn't taken the oath, is a fake knight. Dunk and Brienne both have a sidekick, a young boy as a squire, Egg and Podrick Payne. So Dunk and Egg and Brienne and Pod have a lot of similarities, and George R. R. Martin, the author, reportedly said that Brienne is a descendant of Dunk. So at some point in the story, it seems that Dunk has a kid, and that kid is an ancestor of Brienne. We don't know who that is yet. We don't know what happens there, but that is something that the author has hinted at. Lionel says he will love Dunk like a brother, or he'll hate Dunk like a brother. There are lines in the books about how love and hate can mate. Love and hate are two faces of the same coin. Sometimes the people who are closest to us, we can both love them and hate them. Feelings can be complicated, and in this story we see Prince Maekar's complex feelings for his brother Baelor. To some extent, Maekar loves Baelor, and perhaps to some extent Maekar hates Baelor because he feels jealous of Baelor. This episode also explores Egg's feelings about his brother Aerion. Egg mostly hates Aerion and seems to want to kill Aerion this episode. So just the complexity of relationships and sibling relationships is part of what's here. Lionel saying that he'll love Dunk like a brother is a weird thing to say, because it really does feel like Lionel is hitting on Dunk. Strange that he's like calling Dunk his brother when he seems to be sexually attracted to Dunk. Lionel made some weird incest comments earlier as well, like at the tug of war scene. Lionel made a incest comment. Maybe it's that Targaryen blood in Lionel making him into incest. It's all a bit weird. But yeah, it's a very fun, charismatic scene. And Lionel is acting all glib and acting all relaxed and fun-loving. But then Lionel gets angry. And Lionel yells that Dunk shouldn't feel bad for Baelor. Dunk should appreciate Lionel. Lionel says that Harding and Beesbury and Raymond and me, we fought for Dunk, whereas Baelor is a fraud. Lionel says that Baelor is a fraud because Baelor was fighting against 3 of his own Kingsguard. And the Kingsguard, Roland, Donnel, and Willem, are sworn not to hurt Baelor. And the other combatants in the fight, who Baelor was fighting against, were his brother Prince Maekar, his nephew Prince Aerion, and his nephew Prince Daeron. So, in theory, Baelor should have been really safe in that Trial of Seven. The people who Baelor was fighting against were his own family and his own Kingsguard, plus Stefan Fosselway. So really, like, in theory, Baelor should have been pretty safe in that fight. So I think that Lionel does have a point, that Baelor wasn't really being as brave and as heroic as he seemed to be. Baelor's great heroic sacrifice was maybe not actually as heroic as it seemed. I think it's true that Beesbury and Harding and Lionel and Raymond were taking a greater risk than Dunk was, than Baelor was. But at the end of the day, Baelor did die. Baelor did die in the trial for Dunk. So Lionel's argument is a little bit nonsensical. Baelor did die for Dunk. And I think ultimately this is just Lionel having a tantrum that Dunk is not responding to his flirtation. So yeah, Lionel says Baelor was a fraud, and in the books we do see Baelor fighting against the Kingsguard, but in the show we don't see Baelor fighting any Kingsguard. I think it would have been better if we did see Baelor fighting Kingsguard, because then, like, his plan actually would have made sense and had meaning, you know? But anyway. You'll notice that Lionel has a big flamboyant walking stick with antlers on it, which is one of the best things I've ever seen. Whereas Dunk uses a very simple stick as a walking stick. So again, that is their personality. Lionel is so flamboyant and expressive and wants everyone to look at him, and he's so on brand with his antlers everywhere, whereas Dunk is just simple and humble and practical. So again, part of what this episode is about is the difference between the pampered, luxurious, privileged life of the nobility and the princes versus the humble, simple, morally principled life of a hedge knight like Dunk. And that's what this whole episode hinges on. Because Dunk refuses to live at Summerhall with the princes. He insists on going on the road with Egg. Because the whole sort of moral thematic idea of this story is that heroism does not come from being a privileged, powerful, pampered prince. True heroism comes from humility and idealism and romanticism and those foolish emotions in our hearts and the simple practical realities of living a real life. Not as a privileged prince secluded in luxury. That's not how you become a hero. Dunk is George Martin's model of a true hero in this story. So this whole contrast between Dunk and Lionel is one of the many ways that the episode shows that contrast. So Lionel says Baelor was a fraud, and then Dunk implies that Dunk is a fraud. Why have they favored me? So Dunk is feeling like, it's all his fault that Baelor died. And he's also feeling like, Dunk said earlier that he feels like the gods are punishing him for not knowing his place. Dunk lied about being a knight. He was being all ambitious by coming to the tournament and trying to be greater than he is, trying to be socially mobile, trying to move upwards. And he feels like this is all his punishment for trying to be more than he is. And we saw last episode the flashbacks of Dunk being a poor street urchin, where he had nothing, where he was a gutter rat with nothing. And he was told that he would only ever be nothing. And so there's this terrible sense of worthlessness, this feeling that Dunk is worth less than the fancy noble people. And he feels like he's being punished for trying to be more. And so, like, on the one hand, Dunk's humility is part of what makes him a hero, but also his humility sort of, like, keeps him down in his lower social status. So I think that it's interesting how George explores both the good and the bad of humility. And he doesn't overly romanticize Dunk, you know, coming from poverty, you know? Like, that is part of what made Dunk a good person, but we also don't want to romanticize poverty at the same time, which I think is a whole interesting tangent. So then we get to the funeral, and it's a abrupt, hard cut to the funeral. And so we see all the people gathered to see Prince Baelor off to the afterlife. There are 2 Kingsguard knights there. I think that's Donal and Roland. We don't see the 3rd Kingsguard knight, Willem Wilde. Possibly he's too wounded. In the books, Willem Wilde is carried off because he's wounded, so maybe Willem is also injured in the TV show. I adjusted the audio settings for this live stream, so let me know if the audio is good this time around. I just need to check one of the files because, interestingly, something may be incorrect. Okay, whatever. All right, so this is a pretty small funeral for the heir to the throne. One of the interesting things is that it appears that the king, King Daeron II, is not at the funeral of his son, Prince Baelor, which is weird. In the books, it seems like King Daeron might be here at the funeral, because there's a bit that mentions that, you know, Baelor was believed to be the greatest knight in the realm, but so because he was a great knight, some people think that he should have worn armor and worn armor on his funeral pyre because he was a warrior. But King Daeron has a peaceable nature, and so King Daeron decided that Baelor would just wear clothes. He just wears a black Targaryen tunic on his funeral pyre, and he wears a helmet, but he wears like an ornate thin golden helmet with the visor open so you can see his face. So King Daeron decides that he wants Baelor to present a more peaceful image rather than like a warrior image in the end. And the fact that like the fact that King Daeron decides what Baelor wears on the pyre, that suggests to me that maybe Daeron is here at the funeral. In the book, Dunk doesn't mention King Daeron being here, but it seems as though that might be the case. Or maybe he just sent like a raven telling people what to dress Baelor in. It's kind of weird. Like, I think that, you know, this might just be like a cremation ceremony and then they do the actual funeral at King's Landing. I think it's possible that that's what's meant to be happening, but it's not fully explained. So the Targaryens cremate their dead. Some houses, like the Velaryons, bury their dead at sea. The Beesburys apparently bury their dead in bees, which is remarkable. But the Targaryens believe they are the blood of the dragon. They have dragon fire in their veins, and so their ends are writ in flame. Baelor was only 39. He was the heir to the throne. He was the hand of the king. Everyone thought he was going to be a great king, so it's a tragedy that he dies. We see Maekar looking terrible, looking full of grief and full of pain and full of guilt because it was him who accidentally killed Baelor with his mace. We see young Egg wearing his princely hat. So, like, Egg wears a few different outfits in this episode because I think that this episode is exploring whether Egg will continue to live as a pampered prince at Summerhall or if Egg will live as a hedge knight's squire. So in the end, he shaves his head and he's wearing his simple peasant clothes because he chooses that humble life. But for much of this episode, he wears fancy, princely Targaryen clothes. And I think that the hat is partly to hide Egg's Targaryen blonde hair that is growing back. I think it's really interesting the way they used his Targaryen blonde hair as a symbol of like the Targaryenism inside him that he's trying to get rid of. He's not comfortable with that Targaryenism, but he can't escape it, you know? And we see that in the scene where he tries to kill Aerion, so that's really interesting. And that scene isn't in the book. We see this older blonde guy at the funeral. Some people think that he might be King Daeron. I don't think that that's King Daeron. I think if that was the king, he should be wearing a crown and he should like have more prominence or should be like acknowledged in some way. And also like how would King Daeron have arrived here at Ashford so quickly, because it seems to have only been like a day or so. So I don't think that's the king. He might be a Targaryen with the blonde hair. And so I thought about like which Targaryen he might be. There are a bunch of like many bastards of the old king, King Aegon IV, floating around. So that guy might be some bastard of King Aegon, or he could just be like a Velaryon or someone. I mean, he's wearing some fancy clothes, so I guess he is part of the royal family. I'm guessing some bastard of King Aegon. There's also this older blonde woman. She might be a Targaryen. Maybe she's this guy's partner, maybe. I was thinking that she could maybe be Princess Elena Targaryen. It would be cool if she was like Dana the Defiant, the mother of Daemon Blackfyre. I don't know like where she is at this point in the story. The books don't say. Or she could also be some bastard daughter of Aegon the Unworthy. There are also some younger girls in the background. These two blonde women. I think that they could, in theory, be the daughters of Prince Rhaegal Targaryen. Rhaegal is a brother of Baelor and Maekar. Aelora and Daenora Targaryen. They might be too young at this point in the story, but, you know, the show does change the ages of some of the characters. They might just be some obscure cousins or Velaryons or something. We also see Manfred Dondarrion here at a prominent spot, because Manfred Dondarrion is related to Prince Valar. Valar's mother is a Dondarrion, and so Manfred Dondarrion is probably a cousin of Prince Valar. So the Dondarrions are like close to the royal family. They are like politically important at this time, which makes it all the more funny that Manfred is this obnoxious party boy who just has sex with sex workers all the time and doesn't take anything seriously. But yeah, he is like politically important at this point in time. There's this woman with pink hair, which is cool because this seems to be Kiera of Tyrosh, Valar's wife. Valar is married to a woman from the east, from Tyrosh. And the books don't describe what the books don't describe what Kiera looks like, but we do know that the Tyroshi famously like to dye their hair. We saw some colorful-haired Tyroshi in House of the Dragon season 2. In the Game of Thrones books, Dario has colorful blue hair, and so some fan artists have drawn Kiera of Tyrosh with pink hair. Specifically, Riot Art the Right is a fan artist who I think may have been the first to draw Kiera with pink hair. And it looks as though the people who made the show used Riot Art the Art's idea in giving Kiera pink hair. So that's kind of cool. So, yeah, that's like who I think the people in the funeral might be. I mean, a lot of these are probably just random extras. It's fun how this Septon is like presiding over the funeral of Prince Baelor, heir to the throne. Like this young Septon is probably feeling pretty nervous about running this event. But no one was expecting Baelor to die here. That's just what happened. So Dunk goes up after the funeral and talks to Prince Valar. We see that there's the Silent Sisters who might be collecting Baelor's ashes and putting them... This might be some fancy Targaryen urn for Baelor's ashes. And so Dunk comes and talks to Valar. And so we finally get a decent look at Prince Valar's hair. So Valar is the... son of Baelor with Janna Dondarrion. Valar is now the heir to the throne after King Daeron dies. And Valar has mostly dark hair, like his father Baelor, but he has this streak of silver gold Targaryen hair. In the books, like, fan artists have imagined Valar as having much more long and luxurious locks, but he's got quite short, simple hair in the TV show. I would have liked to see a bit more hair. I would have liked to see this streak looking a bit more magnificent, but this is what they've done in the TV show. And Valar also has heterochromia in the show. His eyes are two different colors because the actor just has two different colored eyes. And so in the TV show, they decided to give Bertie Carvel, the actor who plays Baelor, he wears one contact lens so that he has different colored eyes, just as a connection between father and son. In the books, Tyrion also has heterochromia. He has two different colored eyes. And Alyssa Targaryen has two different colored eyes, and Shiera Seastar has two different colored eyes. It would be really cool to see Shiera Seastar. Shiera Seastar is a half-sibling of Bloodraven and Bittersteel and Daemon Blackfire and King Daeron, and she should be around somewhere at this point in the story. I'd love to know what Shiera Seastar is up to. She's meant to be this witch who had a relationship with Bloodraven and was up to all sorts of stuff. And some people think that Shiera Seastar might be Quaithe. That's a crazy theory, but yeah, she should be kicking around. Lots of book nerds are excited to see Bloodraven as well in future seasons, potentially. So anyway, like, Dunk comes up to Valar and sort of says, like, oh, sorry for getting your dad killed. That's my bad. Sorry for getting your dad killed. And Valar talks about how it's tragic that Baelor died in Valar's armor. And I wonder if Valar feels some guilt. I wonder if Valar feels like if only Valar didn't lend his armor to his father Baelor, then maybe Baelor wouldn't have fought in the trial and wouldn't have died. Or maybe, like, what if Valar himself decided to fight for Dunk instead of Baelor? Then maybe Baelor would be alive. I think Valar, like many people in this story, are dealing with the guilt as well as the grief. In the book, Valar stands vigil by Baelor's corpse. In the books, Jaime Lannister stands vigil for his father Tywin after Tywin dies. He stands by the body for 7 days and 7 nights, guarding him on his way to the afterlife. In the books, Barristan Selmy stands vigil for Hugh of the Vale. It seems to be like a nightly custom to stand by a dead knight's body. And yeah, Valar does it for Baelor in the books. Valar asks why the gods would kill Prince Baelor and leave Dunk. He's trying to find meaning in Baelor's death. Is there destiny? Do the gods have a plan, or is everything just randomness? In the books, Dunk thinks that the world made no sense when a great prince died so that a hedge knight might live. So, he's trying to understand the loss and the tragedy. And again, like, there's this unspoken thing that Baelor is more important than and better than Dunk because of his high class and because of his nobility, because he's a prince. Like, Dunk isn't as bothered by the death of Humphrey Harding and Humphrey Beesbury because they're only knights. Princes are more important. So there is like a class thing going on here as well. So, Dunk tries to do the right thing by coming and acknowledging Valar, but Valar doesn't want to hear it, and he just sort of feels angry at Dunk. Be gone with you, Sir Duncan. And as Dunk hobbles back through the camp, people stare at Dunk. People stare at Dunk because they know that, he was the center of the trial that killed Baelor. And so Dunk might be kind of famous right now. Like, this was a historically significant trial of 7. The first trial of 7 in 100 years. That killed the heir to the throne, and some people seem to see Dunk as a hero. Like, some people were cheering for Dunk, chanting his name at the trial, but some might see Dunk as a bad guy because his trial got Baelor killed. Some people might think that it was a plan to deliberately kill Baelor somehow. So it's an interesting spot that Dunk's in, where some people might love him and some people might hate him. Raymond comes and gives Dunk a big hug. You'll notice that Raymond has a red apple on his clothes. He has kind of cute Fossaway pajamas with a red Fossaway apple on them. and he gives Dunk a big hug. He's so keen to be Dunk's friend, which is adorable. So in the previous episode, or in the fourth episode, Stefan Fossaway betrayed Dunk and joined Arian's team instead. And so Stefan wanted Raymond to continue being his squire, because Raymond was Stefan's squire. But Raymond refused to squire for Stefan after Stefan treacherously, dishonorably betrayed Dunk, and decided to become a knight and fight for Dunk instead. And so Stefan's pissed off that Raymond abandoned him, and pissed off that Raymond beat him up in the trial, and so Stefan has gone and taken the Fossaway tent with him. And we see that Raymond has had his shield repainted. He's now got a green shield with a green Fossaway apple instead of the red Fossaway apple. It doesn't make like a whole lot of sense when Raymond repainted the shield, because in the books it seems as though Raymond like sees Stefan's betrayal, becomes a knight, and then Raymond like runs off and gets his shield repainted, and then comes back in like the minutes, the moments between his knighthood and the trial, which is like, how could he possibly have had the shield repainted in that time? And it seems to be the same thing in the show. In the show, Raymond used this green shield in the Trial of Seven, which I don't see how it's possible that he got it repainted in such a short amount of time. So that's like kind of a small plot hole, but who cares? So yeah, this is the green Fossaway apple that I was talking about, that Raymond somehow got repainted in like the minutes between Stefan's betrayal and the trial. So the other wonderful revelation here is that Red is in Raymond's tent. So Red is the woman who Dunk met in episode 1. Red is a sex worker who was hanging out with Manfred Dondarrion. And now Red is in a different situation. We also saw Red during the trial by combat. She was sitting in the crowd with Manfred Dondarrion, and she was cheering for Dunk, and Manfred was annoyed that Red was cheering for Dunk. And so now Red has hooked up with Raymond Fossaway, and Red has told Raymond that her name is Lady Rowan, which might be a lie, because her name seemed to be Red, and the word lady implies that she's a noble lady from House Rowan, which she definitely isn't. House Rowan is one of the most powerful and important houses in the Reach. It's not clear whether she's actually claiming to be a Rowan of House Rowan, but she is pretending to be more upper class than she actually is. And she's also claiming to be pregnant with Raymond's son, which she can't possibly know at this point. So she's bullshitting her way into a marriage with Raymond. It's a little bit similar to what Jane Westerling does with Robb Stark in the books. And he seems besotted with her, and she seems to like him, and so she's using this as a way to get social advancement. And so Raymond, of the Green Apple Fossaways, he is now starting a whole new noble house. In the books, at least, the Green Apple Fossaways of New Barrel, they become a whole different family, a whole different house to the Red Apple Fossaways of Cider Hall. And even 90 years later in the main series, these two Fossaway houses are still separate, distinct families. And so it seems that in the show, Red is the matriarch, is the progenitor of the entire Green Apple Fossaway family, which is hilarious and great. And she does this by bullshitting Raymond. And I think that part of why they're putting it in the story is that this makes Red similar to Dunk, right? Because it's revealed in this episode that Dunk is not a knight, or at least it's very strongly implied that Arlen never knighted Dunk. So in the same way that Dunk is lying, pretending to be a knight to gain social advancement, Red is lying and pretending to be more upper class than she is, and pretending not to be a sex worker so that she can marry Raymond and get a better life. It's similar to how Egg lies about being a commoner in episode 1, and now Egg lies and claims that Maker gave permission for Egg to go off with Dunk so that Egg can live a better life with Dunk. Dunk and Egg and Red are all liars, and they lie to get better lives and hopefully for the greater good, for everyone's better off. And so it's really paradoxical that the heroes are liars in this story. which I find really fascinating. And yeah, again, yeah, check out the cute little red apple on Raymond's pajamas. Do you think that Raymond is going to change the apple on his pajamas to be a green apple instead? I mean, there are apples on like everything the Fossaways own. Like, Raymond's going to have to change all the apples. Raymond's going to have to alter all of the red apples on all of his clothes and all of his things into little green apples instead. These lordlings, they love their personal branding, don't they? In the books, there's a whole thing where the Fossaways are not a lordly house at this time. They're not a lordly noble house. They're only landed knights. Like, there's multiple different, like, ranks of houses in this world. Like, at the top, you've got the Royal Targaryen house, and then you've got the great houses who rule regions, like the Starks, the Arryns, the Tullys, the Lannisters, the Tyrells. And then you've got, like, some important houses, like, you know, the Rowans and the Redwynes, etc., and the Hightowers. Those are some of the most powerful houses that are not great houses. And then below them, you've got like more minor lordly houses. And then below them, you've got landed knights. The Cleganes, for example, are landed knights. They do rule a small area of land, but they're not considered like proper lordly houses. They don't have a lord as such. And so I think that at this point in the history, the Fossaways are merely landed knights, not a noble lordly house. And that's part of why Aerion was able to promise Stefan Fossaway, I will make you a lord. Because the Fossaways at this time were not lords. They were just landed knights. But the whole sort of history of that is kind of confusing and poorly explained and possibly retconned at some point in the books. So don't worry about it, is my suggestion with regards to the Fossaways. So yeah, Red, Dunk, and Egg are all liars, and they all lie about their names. Like, Dunk lies and creates a new identity for himself as Sir Duncan the Tall, not Dunk. And Red lies and invents a new identity for herself as Lady Rowan of the Fossaways. And Egg lies and creates a new identity for himself as Egg instead of Prince Aegon Targaryen. So George is always fascinated with the concept of identity, and he's also interested in how identity is something that we can change and reinvent, and how like names are part of the social trappings that decide who we are and what we're allowed to be. And so I think that's explored through Red and Dunk and Egg here. So then some Targaryen, and so Dunk decides to keep Red's secret. Like, Dunk could say, hey, like, Raymond, are you aware that Lady Rowan is actually Red and she was, like, a sex worker with Manfred Dondarrion? Are you aware of that, Raymond? But he decides not to. He keeps Red's secret. So there's some solidarity between Dunk and Red. Because Dunk and Red both came from the bottom. They are both considered, like, at the bottom of the social hierarchy. And so it's interesting that, like, even while Raymond is, like, trying to be Dunk's friend, Dunk is a better friend to Red than he is to Raymond here, in a way, isn't he? Because ultimately, Dunk and Red have more in common, because they're from the bottom of the social hierarchy, whereas Raymond is a lordling. He comes from a higher social class. Like, Raymond is the kind of guy who can just buy Dunk a horse. Raymond buys Sweetfoot for Dunk. And Dunk is kind of shocked, like, whoa, you bought a horse for me? Because Dunk has never had enough money to just buy a horse as a gift on a whim. So it's interesting. You know, Dunk is more like Red. So then some Targaryen soldiers come and tell Dunk to come and talk to Maker. And in the books, this is a little bit different. In the books, Dunk is sitting under his tree, and the Targaryen soldiers come. And in the books, Dunk is thinking, oh, I think they might be coming to kill me. Like, after everything that's happened, after this big trial, I think the Targaryens have just decided to kill me after all. And Dunk thinks, oh, I should probably pull out my sword to defend myself. But Dunk decides that he's too tired and too weary and too weak to even fight. So Dunk is really, really despairing and depressed right now. He's really kind of like, part of him wants to be dead, is where Dunk's at. And Peter Claffey says as much in the Inside the episode. Also in the books, the guardsmen come and say, the prince would like to speak to you. And Dunk in the book is like, which prince? Which prince wants to speak to me? I hope it's not bloody Aerion again. I hope it's not bloody Darren. Dunk has just had enough of princes. Princes have ruined Dunk's life. And again, part of the point of that is reaffirming that Dunk's humble life as a lowborn person is what he believes in. He believes in a simple, morally principled life like Arlen, not a fancy, pampered, privileged life like these princes. I guess another thing to consider about Red is that, like, she says that she's pregnant. Red has been having sex with Manfred Dondarrion for days and days, if not weeks and months. If Red is pregnant, she might be more likely to be carrying Manfred Dondarrion's kid rather than Raymond's. It would be a bit sad and duplicitous if Red gave birth to a kid and said it was Raymond's when it was actually Manfred's. Wouldn't be the first time that some disputed parentage came up in this world, would it? So, Dunk goes and talks to Makar, and in the books, they only have one conversation in the books. And in the book, they talk outside. Makar comes to Dunk outside under Dunk's tree. And I prefer that in the books, because I think that it's an interesting act of humility for Makar to come to Dunk, rather than Makar summoning Dunk to him. And I think that the outdoors, that they play a role in the story, because when Dunk is considering Makar's offer for Dunk to live at Summerhall with Egg and to serve Makar, in the book, Dunk looks at the little pond and he looks at the dragonflies and he thinks, what will it be, dragons or dragonflies? Will I live with Targaryen princes, or will I live outside with nature on the road? Again, that idea of like privilege versus humility. And so the outdoors are like part of that thought process in the book. But in the show, Dunk has two conversations with Makar and they're both indoors, which I think is a bit of a loss. It's a little bit of a loss. We see Makar reading books, and it's similar to how Baelor read books earlier on. So I wonder if Makar is thinking, like, damn, like, now that Baelor is dead, I have to fill his shoes. Like, someone has to be the strong, wise, charismatic, big brother to hold this family together. And it's not going to be bloody Rhaegal, because Makar and Baelor's brother Rhaegal is said to be mad. And it's not going to be Aerys, because Aerys is a weird nerd who just likes reading books about prophecy. So it's like, damn, like Baelor was the one guy holding this family together, but maybe now it has to be Makar. And I think that maybe part of why Makar is reading books is because he's thinking that I've got to be like Baelor. I've got to read books like Baelor. I've got to be wise and thoughtful like Baelor. And I think that Makar knows that those are big shoes to fill. Makar says that he's sending Aerion to the east as punishment for being a prick and being violent and attacking Tanzil and losing the trial. Makar sends Aerion away. He exiles him, banishes him to the east. It would have saved everybody some trouble if Makar banished Aerion before the trial of Seven. Like, Makar is part of why this trial happened. Like, if Makar insisted and said, like, no, Aerion, you're an idiot, like, and if Makar agreed with Baelor and just said, no, like, Dunk is obviously innocent here, and Darren is obviously lying, and Tanzil's play was obviously not intended as treason. Like, if Makar chose differently, this trial wouldn't have happened, and Baelor would be alive. So that's another part of the guilt that Makar bears, as well as having dealt the blow that killed Baelor. In the books, Makar specifically sends Aerion to Lys. Lys is one of the free cities. How about I pull up a map? That would be good. The known world map. So the free cities are these cities along the western coast of Essos. So the free cities include Braavos and Pentos and Volantis, Tyrosh, Myr, and Lys. We've seen some of these cities in the Game of Thrones TV show. And so Lys is here. Lys is one of the southernmost of the free cities, just across from Dorne. And Lys is renowned as a beautiful tropical paradise, and it is a center of the slave trade. Lys is famous for its sex workers and for its sex slaves. So I don't know why Makar thinks that sending Aerion to Lys will make Aerion a better person, because Lys is like a party town for terrible people who want to have sex with slaves, like an island where people go to have sex with slaves. That sounds a bit topical. I don't see how that's going to make Arian a better person, but that's what Maekar does. Maekar has tried nothing, and he's all out of ideas as a parent. You know, like there is nothing. Maekar is not dad of the year. Like Arian clearly needs some parenting, and what Maekar does is send Arian to the paradise where bad things happen. So that seems like a bad idea. Let's also remember that there are some Blackfires still alive. Like the rebel Daemon Blackfire is dead, but some of his sons and his half-brother Bittersteel are alive and in the east. So, like, if I was Maekar, I would not be sending Arian closer to the rebels. That would be a weird choice. But Dunk is just glad that Arian is gone. There are theories, speculation in the fandom that maybe George Martin was intending for Arian to come back and be a villain in future stories. That maybe Arian was going to play the role of the Blackfires, like lead a rebel Blackfire rebel offshoot or something, but in the end Martin chose the Blackfires instead, which were invented after he wrote this book, The Hedge Knight. It's got a complicated history, the lore. Anyway, so going to the Free Cities is also evocative of Rafe's plan last episode, when Rafe was saying let's go east to the Free Cities and have adventures. That's what Arian is doing. So, that was Rafe's great hope. Rafe's great hope was like, we'll have a better life if we leave King's Landing and go to the Free Cities. Whereas for Arian, it's his punishment to go to the Free Cities. Doesn't seem like much of a punishment. So, Maekar talks about how he accidentally killed his brother Baelor with his mace, and he talks about how people will blame him. And especially after King Daeron dies and after Valar becomes king, whenever anything bad happens in the realm, people will say, oh, well, it's all because Valar is king instead of Baelor. Baelor wouldn't have let this happen, and so it's all the fault of Maekar. And Dunk says that, well, it's also Dunk's fault, because Baelor died for Dunk, and so they're all feeling guilt. In the Game of Thrones history book, it says that Maekar killed Baelor, and it was, quote, almost certainly an accident. Almost certainly. So I think that the books are telling us that, yes, it was an accident for Maekar to kill Baelor, but maybe on some level it was deliberate. Maybe on some subconscious level. Remember Lionel's line, I'll love you like a brother, I'll hate you like a brother. On some level, Maekar hated Baelor, and on some level, Maekar wanted Baelor dead. Remember that in this world, one of the worst crimes is kinslaying. Killing your own family is the worst thing you can do. It's said, no man is as cursed as the kinslayer in the eyes of gods and men. So, like, Maekar will be stigmatized with that. He is considered cursed by everyone forever, and that will haunt him for the rest of his life. In the book, Dunk feels like he could hate Maekar, because Maekar caused this trial, and let's remember that Maekar smacked Dunk in the face with a mace, like, just yesterday. So Dunk is like, I could hate Maekar, but in the book, Dunk feels a queer sympathy for Maekar. Dunk sympathizes with Maekar. Maekar's one of my favorite characters in the books, because he has so much complexity to him, and he is gruff, and he is dislikable and rude, but he also has pain and vulnerability, and he shows it in these scenes, which I think is really beautiful. So they talk about, is there meaning in Baelor's death, or is everything just randomness? Are there gods with a plan? Dunk thinks that, well, maybe Baelor had to die, because maybe there'll be a day when the realm will need that foot even more than it needs Prince Baelor's life. So Dunk is saying that, well, maybe the gods have a plan, and maybe Baelor had to die because maybe I need to do something good for the realm one day. Now, there are things in the books that could be an answer to this question. I'll talk about it in the spoiler zone near the end of this live stream. So if you want to know what Dunk does that might be his great destiny, stick around for the spoiler zone near the end of this live stream. Maekar says that not bloody likely. Maekar says, I don't think you have a special destiny because the realm has lots of hedge knights. It has as many hedge knights as hedges. In the book, Maekar says, the realm has as many hedge knights as hedges and all of them have feet. Joking on that idea that Dunk would have had his foot and hand cut off if he lost the trial. And in the book, Maekar says, perhaps there are no gods. Maybe none of this has any meaning. Maekar says he would ask the High Septon, the Pope, but the High Septon said no man can truly understand the gods. Maekar says maybe the High Septon should try sleeping under a tree. So again, George Martin is saying maybe, like, you know, priests and religious figures don't really have the answers to our philosophical questions. Maybe the answers of meaning and destiny are to be found in nature and in our own contemplation, not in a church. Dunk says that Arlen says you never know what the morrow might bring. You never know what the future might hold. So, you know, we just got to carry on and find meaning where we can. Maekar asks Dunk to come work for him at Summerhall. Summerhall is a Targaryen castle in the Stormlands. It's near the border of the Reach, Stormlands, and Dawn. Summerhall is more of a comfortable palace rather than like a fortified military castle. Summerhall was built by King Daeron to commemorate his peace with Dawn. Daeron unified Dawn with the rest of Westeros for the first time, and so Summerhall represents that peace. The peace is still imperfect. Some people, especially the Reachmen and the Stormlanders, hate the Dornish because they've been fighting the Dornish for thousands of years. And some of that, like, Dornish prejudice was behind the Blackfyre Rebellion, because some of the Blackfyre rebels didn't like that King Daeron married a Dornish woman and gave the Dornish special political privileges. So that's an ongoing political issue at this time. So Maekar is basically offering Dunk the best job in the world. Maekar is saying you can live at Summerhall and we will train you to be a better knight, and Egg can be your squire, because Egg says he only wants to squire for you. So you can live at Summerhall and it'll be a comfortable life and it'll be a more prestigious life. It'll be way better than being a traveling hedge knight on the road, in theory. Like, this is what Dunk dreamed of. Like, when Dunk decided to be a knight at the Ashford tournament, this was like the best he could possibly hope for. The best he could hope for was some lord saying, oh yeah, you can work for me, Dunk. That's what Dunk was hoping for. But and getting a job with the royal family at Summerhall is like the best possible job you could imagine. Like, Summerhall is going to be a pretty cushy place. And it's the most prestigious job. Like, this is a huge move up for Dunk. Like, going from a hedge knight to being, like, working at Summerhall, like, that's like being the intern and being promoted to, like, regional sales officer. You know what I mean? Like, this is a big promotion from hedge knight to Prince Maekar's household. Like, that's a big promotion. So, like, Dunk would have instantly said yes if this was offered to him days ago before the trial. But now, after everything that's happened, Dunk has changed, and Dunk's opinions have changed. Dunk used to believe that, like, princes were good and the royal family was good. Like, remember when Dunk was shocked that Aerion stabbed Humphrey Harding's horse? Dunk really believed that princes and knights are good and honorable and better than lowborn people. But now he's realized that no, like, every prince I've met has been a disaster. Every prince that Dunk has met has been a hot mess. The only prince who had his shit together was Baelor, and now he's dead. Aerion was a cruel, violent, psychotic monster. Daeron is an alcoholic, liar, hot mess. Egg is a delight, but, you know, he's like 9 years old, and he lies, and he's chaotic, and, you know, he's great, but he's just a kid. So it's like, why would Dunk want to accept a job with these princes who have done nothing but ruin his life? It's been like 3 days of hanging out with princes, and Dunk has already almost died at least once. So of course Dunk says no. And again, like, it fundamentally comes back to Dunk realizing that the life of pampered, privileged, powerful lords is not the right life. It's not the life of a true hero and a true knight. The life of a true hero and a true knight, in Dunk's eyes, is the life of Arlen. A simple, humble life with moral principles and excessive alcohol and Dothraki sing-song time. Dothraki sing-alongs. I would still love to know how Arlen knows Dothraki songs, but there you go. So in the show, Dunk refuses Maekar's offer. He says, no, I've had enough of princes. I won't accept the job. And this is a change from the book. In the book, Dunk says, yes, I will take Egg, but I will take Egg on the road. It's just one conversation that Dunk has with Maekar. Whereas in the show, they expand that. They have Dunk initially refusing the call. And so that gives us more time to explore Dunk's thought process of all of those themes we were talking about. So Egg spies on Maekar and Dunk's conversation, just like how Dunk spied on Baelor and Maekar's conversation earlier. And there's a lot of sadness and awkwardness and distance now between Dunk and Egg. They were so close, they were so friendly in like episode 2 and 3 because they kind of thought they were the same. They were just bros hanging out. They thought, like, Dunk thought that they were both commoners and they were both experiencing all of this for the first time. But after Dunk found out that Egg was lying and Egg is actually a prince, not a commoner, and after Dunk nearly died because of Egg's family, it's all, their whole relationship feels very different and it feels very strained. And, Dunk is traumatized physically and emotionally. So it's not easy for Dunk to feel okay with Egg right now, even though Dunk does love Egg like a brother and almost like a father. So there's so much complexity here, and right now they're not able to bridge that gap. And I like this shot because it shows the distance between them. It shows that this window creates a barrier between them. They're sitting like as far apart from each other. They're not looking at each other. It says everything about how they're feeling immediately and visually, and I like the shot. Egg says that I guess Dunk is not the knight he thought he was, and that has meanings on so many levels. It's like saying, Egg is saying that, well, maybe Dunk is not as principled and moral as I thought he was. Maybe he doesn't love me like I thought he was. Maybe he's not strong and brave enough to be my master. But also, like, Dunk is literally not a knight, as we're about to find out. So he's not a knight at all, the way Egg thought he was. And of course, Egg is not who Dunk thought he was. So there's all this distance and misunderstanding and pain here now. So then we get a flashback, and this is a fascinating scene, which again isn't in the book. So this is at the tree where Arlen dies. And you'll see that Arlen has this bandage on his arm, this bloody bandage on his wounded arm. So, and like Arlen is wearing that bandage when Dunk buries him. So this seems to be shortly before Arlen dies, in the place where Arlen dies. And Arlen is telling a story about Pennytree. Pennytree is a village in the Riverlands. Pennytree is in between the lands of House Blackwood and House Bracken. And it seems as though the people of Pennytree got involved in a lot of wars, probably because of the Blackwoods and the Brackens. The Blackwoods and the Brackens have been fighting each other for thousands of years. Pennytree is disputed land. So, like, sometimes Pennytree is controlled by the Blackwoods, sometimes Pennytree is controlled by the Brackens. And so this is probably part of why the people of Pennytree have to fight in wars all the time. We see the Blackwoods and the Brackens fighting each other in House of the Dragon, and they're also fighting in the time of Game of Thrones, so it's a long-standing issue. It's also part of the issue with the Blackfire Rebellion. If I pull up the family tree... you'll see that, so the Blackfire Rebellion was between King Daeron II and Daemon Blackfire, these two fellas here. And the Blackfire Rebellion was partly a Bracken-Blackwood conflict, because one of Blackfire's main supporters was Bittersteel, his half-brother Aegor Rivers. And Bittersteel was a son of a Bracken, Barber Bracken, while one of the Targaryen's main supporters was Bloodraven, and Bloodraven was a son of Melissa Blackwood. So there were all these rival women who were all having sex with King Aegon the Unworthy and all vying for his favor. And so some of the time Aegon was supporting Barba and the Brackens and Bittersteel, and some of the time he was showing favor to the Blackwoods and Bloodraven. And so that's part of where the whole war of the Blackfyre Rebellion came from, was the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And in some ways that conflict is still going on today in the books, because there is a character, Youngriff, who might be a Blackfyre, and he's supported by the Golden Company, and meanwhile Bloodraven is still alive in the books and might be pushing a Blackwood agenda in some sense. And so it's really, there's a sort of a, you can make an argument that the grand like Bracken Blackwood conflict is like is still going. It's the cause of all the wars for centuries, kind of, maybe. But anyway, so Arlen comes from Pennytree, and whenever the boys of Pennytree went off to war, they would nail a penny to the trunk of a big oak tree in their village. And if they came back from the war alive, they would take the penny down again. But there are hundreds of pennies nailed to the tree. There are hundreds of boys who never came home from war. Every penny is a dead boy, which is so tragic and powerful. And, like, I think in some sense this is an old gods human sacrifice type thing, because the Blackwoods are first men who worship the old gods, and the first men do or did have a practice of sacrificing humans to the weirwood trees. You know, like Bran has the magic of the weirwoods, and there's blood in the weirwood trees, and so there's this whole human sacrifice element, which I think that this penny tree thing might symbolically be a human sacrifice type thing. But anyway, so like in the 5th book, Jaime Lannister goes to Pennytree and he sees the pennies on the tree. And Jaime wonders why there are pennies on the tree, but he decides not to ask because that would spoil the mystery, quote unquote. So I think George R. R. Martin has been planning for decades to explain the penny tree. 2011 is when the 5th book came out, and I think for at least that many years, at least 15 years, George Martin has been planning to reveal the penny tree mystery. And I think that George was probably going to reveal this mystery in the 5th Dunk and Egg book, The Village Hero. However, George Martin has not written the 5th book, The Village Hero. He's only published 3 Dunk and Egg books, and so I think here the TV show is revealing the answer to a mystery that George Martin came up with at least 15 years ago. Probably longer. So, yeah, that's what the pennies are about. And I suppose that Arlen's nephew Roger is one of those boys who died in war and never came home. So, I guess Roger has a penny on the penny tree. So, Arlen is telling this story that Dunk has already heard a lot of times, and Dunk asks Arlen an important question. Why did you never knight me? So I think this is revealing that Arlen never knighted Dunk. Dunk is lying about being a knight. That's been, like, hinted at many times in the show and in the books, and I think they're finally making it explicit. I guess it's possible that Arlen did knight Dunk after this scene, but before Arlen died, so I guess there's still a little bit of ambiguity here, but I think what we're meant to take from this is that yes, Arlen never knighted Dunk. The hero is a liar, just like Red and Egg. And so when Dunk asks Arlen this big emotional question, Arlen pretends to die. He pretends to die, or he, like, falls asleep with his eyes open, or he has a stroke, or like he's dying, I guess. So maybe he's just zonked out for a moment and he doesn't hear Dunk. He slips into a coma for a moment. It's very weird and ambiguous, but Arlen, like, just doesn't respond for a bit. And Dunk thinks that Arlen is dead. And then Arlen suddenly comes back to life and says, and that's why they call it the penny tree. A true knight always finishes his story. And then Arlen almost winks. So it's like, I think that Arlen did hear Dunk's question. Arlen just didn't want to answer Dunk's question. So the question is, why didn't Arlen knight Dunk? And I think there's a lot of different possible answers to that. Dunk suggests that, well, maybe Arlen was afraid that Dunk would leave him. Because we saw in the previous episode that Arlen really needed Dunk. Arlen had lost Roger, Arlen was lonely, Arlen needed a squire. Dunk was there for him. In the same way that, Dunk desperately needed someone after the death of Rafe. And so maybe it just came down to that fear of loss and that fear of loneliness and the love that Arlen had for Dunk. I think another possible answer is that Arlen knows that the life of a hedge knight is hard. And it's violent, and it's traumatic, and maybe Arlen thinks that it wouldn't be good for Dunk to be knighted. Maybe Arlen doesn't want Dunk to live the hard life of a hedge knight like he did. Maybe that's part of the answer. We can speculate all day. But I think that Dunk is haunted by not knowing. I think this shot here shows Dunk being haunted. Like, Dunk is remembering this in this moment. And so I think Dunk doesn't know why Arlen never knighted him. And it's this big question and mystery that he might never get an answer to. So I think it's fun how they finally sort of explicitly suggest that Arlen didn't knight Dunk after all of these hints, after all this speculation. I also think it's really funny that an old man would rather pretend to die rather than have an emotional conversation. which I think is very real. Old men not wanting to talk about their feelings. I think that's very real. So yeah, this is kind of like the entire heart of the story in a lot of ways, I think. Like it's this great paradox that Dunk is the one honest man at Ashford, but he's also fundamentally a liar. And Dunk is fundamentally honorable and principled and follows the ideals of knighthood, but he also broke the fundamental ideals of knighthood by falsely pretending to be a knight. So I think it's a fascinating paradox. And then we hard cut from this like emotional thematic moment to like maybe the funniest moment in any Game of Thrones show, which is the reveal that Humphrey Beesbury has been interred in a bee coffin. His coffin is covered in bees. His corpse is covered in bees. And Raymond is like, is that bee magic? And Red says, it's not bee magic, my poor sweet warrior. They put the queen in the coffin. That's why the bees are there. It's the most wacky, ridiculous moment. And no, it's not in the books. Humphrey Beesbury, of course, remember, is the guy with the bee moustache. Sorry, with the orange moustache. Here he is. Humphrey Beesbury. So he was killed by the Kingsguard in Dunk's trial by combat. And I just think that it's crazy and delightful. The Beesburys are a bit of a meme in the fandom at this point, and I think that the showrunners have done well to sort of nod to that meme and to play along with the joke. Here is some badass fan art by Evan Mel Amundsen. Evan has done some wonderful fan art about Dunk and Egg, and this is some fan art of Humphrey Beesbury looking absolutely resplendent. I love it. So yeah, the TV show shows the Beesburys buried in a bee coffin, and it's incredible. And again, it's like, the Targaryens, their ends are writ in flame because their sigil is the Targaryen dragon, and the Velaryons consign their dead to the sea, like Laena Velaryon's funeral, because the Velaryons are sailors and they love the sea. And the Beesburys, they love bees. They got beehives, so they bury their dead in the beehives, and it's delightful. We also get these children playing under the bee coffin, and one of them says, "Do you yield, dragon whore?" And she says, "Eat shit, Sarah," which is delightful. Even amidst the death, there's children playing. There's a lot of like life and death stuff here, and there's funerals and there's death. But there's also trees and life and hope with Dunk and Egg riding off into the sunset. The tree is such a wonderful symbol of life and death, and that is Dunk's sigil on his shield. Red jokes about Raymond's brain being turned to applesauce by all of that fighting. Red is fitting right in to the Fossaway way of life with all of these apple puns. So you can see her becoming a Lady Fossaway right in front of us. But Yeah. Bees in the chat for Humphrey Beesbury, the stripiest knight in Westeros. Farewell, sweet prince. So then Dunk talks to Daeron. Now, Daeron, Prince Daeron, son of Maekar, brother of Egg, he is one of the reasons why all of this horrible stuff happened. Baelor's death is partly Daeron's fault as well, because Daeron lied and said that Dunk kidnapped Egg, and Daeron said that to cover his failure to look after Egg, and his failure to find Egg, and his cowardice when he ran off and didn't want to participate in the tourney. Like, a lot of this is Daeron's fault. Daeron was one of the accusers who this whole trial was about. If Daeron had told the truth, then maybe none of this would have happened. And it's funny that, like, you know, a lot of these characters seem to have learned a lot and been changed by their experiences. But when Dunk is like, you know, this is your fault, you should be ashamed, Daeron just shrugs. Look at this shrug. Because I think the fact is, Daeron learned nothing from this experience that he didn't already know. Daeron already hated himself. Daeron had already given up on himself. Just like Maekar has given up on Daeron. Daeron already despised himself, so no, Daeron learned nothing from all of this. Daeron started this story feeling like he's a piece of shit, and he's ended this story feeling like he's a piece of shit. And it's tragic that he and his father have given up on him. It's tragic. But Daeron does do one good thing, and the one good thing that Daeron does is he says, hey, Dunk, you should take Egg as squire. And the reason you should take Egg as squire is because it will be a better life for Egg than being with this family. Daeron says that his brother Aerion used to be a nice kid. He used to be a glad child. He used to like fishing. But this family made a man of him. This family turned him into the violent, monstrous madman that he is. And so Daeron's implying that if Egg stays with his family, with Maekar, with Daeron, with Aerion, then Egg might also become a monster. And we see that in the next scene when Egg considers killing Aerion. So I think it's really beautiful that Daeron is saying, please take Egg away from this family. Daeron is like, there's no hope for me, there's no hope for Aerion, but there could be hope for Egg if he gets away from this toxic family and the whole privileged, pampered lifestyle of a prince. All this Targaryen madness, he should live a different life. So this is validating everything Dunk feels about the humble life of a hedge knight being better. And, you know, the talk about Aerion being a glad child who liked fishing connects to when we see Egg in episode 1 having fished. Egg fishes for Dunk's camp in episode 1. So Egg absolutely is a glad child who likes fishing. And then in the next scene, we see a fish on Egg's plate that Egg has stabbed with a knife. So again, it's like, oh, this glad child who likes fishing, he's stabbing fishes now. Ooh. Actually, there's like multiple stabs in the fish. Yeah, look at that. He's really like gouged some wounds into that fish. Egg has done some violence to this fish. And he's about to do some violence to his brother. So, like, Daeron is right. Like, there is that dog in Egg. There is violence and anger and hate in Egg. And they've got to try and save him from that. Daeron says that perhaps the seeds of madness are sown in the womb. So, in the books, Barristan Selmy says, King Jaehaerys Targaryen once said that madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. So there's this idea that many Targaryens are mad and violent and terrible. And it's true that some Targaryens are mad and violent and terrible, like Daenerys' father, the Mad King Aerys II, like King Maegor the Cruel, like King Baelor the Blessed. He was so crazy that he starved himself to death. Prince Rhaegal, the brother of Maekar and Baelor, is mad. Arguably, Aerion is mad. Arguably, Daenerys' brother Viserys is mad. Daenerys, in the Game of Thrones TV show, seems to go a bit mad when she burns King's Landing. So maybe Egg could also go mad. Maybe he could also become violent. I will talk in the spoiler zone about whether that is true. I think the idea of Targaryen madness is a little bit exaggerated. Like, the whole coin flip thing implies that it's like 50-50 whether a Targaryen goes mad, but there are dozens and dozens of Targaryens in the lore, and most of them are not mad. Most of the, like, I think that the idea of someone being, like, crazy is less interesting for a character than a character being layered and complex and realistic. I think as soon as we start labeling things as crazy or mad, we stop thinking about motivations and emotions and layers. And so for me, like, madness is not a very interesting idea for a character, and I think George is usually a bit more nuanced than mad, quote unquote. And I think that even the mad characters have some method to their madness and some reasons for their madness and some layers in their madness. And I think that includes Mad King Aerys. You know, there is a play, a stage show coming out this year called The Mad King, about the tourney of Harrenhal, about the Mad King Aerys, set some 16 years before Game of Thrones, which is interesting. I'm fascinated to see what that play is like. Maybe we'll make some videos about that play. Who knows? Let me know in the comments what you think of that new play that's been announced. So yeah, Daeron is shit and a coward, but he does a good thing asking Dunk to take Egg so that Egg grows into a better man. So then we get a scene of Egg looking very sad and very alone in the dark in his, like, fancy princely room. Egg is so much better off outside in nature with common people, having experiences with Dunk and friendship and good times. He's so much worse off being in this dark, luxury, pampered, enclosed world. And I think this shot says that so effectively, doesn't it? It so concisely tells us how suffocating this princely life is. And Egg is holding his princely hat, and he looks in the mirror, and he sees his blonde Targaryen hair growing in. So this is, of course, why Daeron shaved Egg's head, was to hide his Targaryen blonde hair, to hide that he's a Targaryen prince when Daeron was trying to hide. And I you know, this scene isn't in the book, but I think it's so clever how they use the Targaryen hair coming back as, like, this is something inside Egg that he can't escape. Like, it's this fear, this idea that, oh no, like, there is Targaryen madness in me, and I can't escape my nature, and maybe I can't stop myself from being violent and hateful. Maybe that's just in my blood, sown in the womb, which is a terrifying idea. It's also kind of a Lovecraftian idea. H.P. Lovecraft is an influence on George Martin and Game of Thrones, and one of those Lovecraftian ideas is the fear that, oh no, there is something monstrous in my blood. Oh no, I'm a fish man, and I'm destined to join the evil fish people. And there's also some racism in what Lovecraft does. But it's that idea of, oh no, there's something evil in my nature, evil in my ancestry. And that is something that Egg is grappling with right now. And so ultimately, Egg rejects his Targaryenism when he runs off with Dunk and shaves his head and decides to be a humble peasant boy instead. So that's really, like, the central tension in Egg's character, I think, between humility and princeliness. So Egg decides to murder his brother Aerion. I really like the way this is shot. Like, it shows the fish with the knife in it, and then we get a shot of the fish without the knife in it. It doesn't show Egg taking the knife. It just shows the knife being there and then not being there, which I think is, like, a cool creative way of making us go, oh, the knife isn't there. Egg took the knife, and then we see the knife in his hand, and it's, I don't know, it's just creatively shot. Sarah Adina Smith is the director of this episode, and I think that she's done a lot of fun stuff in this season. So Egg approaches his brother Aerion and considers killing him while he's vulnerable. This is similar to a scene in House of the Dragon Season 2. It's also kind of similar to how Euron Greyjoy killed some of his brothers in the book when his brother was bedridden and weak. And so the reason why Egg wants to kill Aerion is that Aerion abused Egg and threatened Egg with a knife when they were younger. Aerion threw Egg's cat down a well. And Aerion killed Humphrey Harding's horse, and Aerion attacked Tansel, and Aerion dragged Dunk into this trial and caused the trial that killed Baelor. Aerion arguably deserves to die. Aerion has caused a lot of violence and horror for no good reason. But Aerion is Egg's brother, and as Baelor said, the Septons say we must love our brothers. And, like Lionel says this episode, I will love you like a brother, I will hate you like a brother. The complexities of close family relationships are at the core of this story. And Egg is preparing to do something that is like, arguably it would be a good thing if Aerion was dead, but also, like, this is a line that you should not cross, is killing your own family. Kinslaying is the ultimate crime, and Egg is contemplating it. And maybe it would be better if Aerion was dead, but Egg would not be the same. Like, you cannot do something like that and still be okay. Like, it seems like it's something that would corrupt you. It's a stain you can't take away if you kill your own family, is the idea here. And so just before Egg looks like he's gonna kill Aerion, Maekar stops Egg. And, this is a difficult thing for a father to see, one of his children trying to kill another one of his children. I mean, this is pretty hard to come back from this. This is pretty dark as a parent, seeing your children trying to kill each other. I mean, Maekar's family is exploding. Like, Maekar's brother Baelor just died, killed by Maekar, and now another Targaryen is trying to kill another Targaryen. This family is destroying itself, like the Dance of the Dragons in House of the Dragon. The biggest threat to the Targaryens is always other Targaryens, even the Blackfire Rebellion. The Blackfires are just an offshoot of the Targaryens. The Blackfires are legitimized Targaryen bastards. The biggest threat to the only thing that can destroy the Targaryens is the Targaryens. I mean, also Robert Baratheon, but only because the Targaryens, weakened themselves so many times. That's a thing about fire, it burns itself out. I think that it's really beautiful and sad the way that Maekar holds his son, Egg, but they don't make eye contact, they don't look at each other, they don't talk to each other. Egg does, like, lean into his father, but there's no communication, and there's no sharing of feelings, and this, like, possessive hands on Egg's shoulders, it's more controlling than it's loving, perhaps, And I think all this body language tells us so much about what this relationship is. I remember that Egg said that he doesn't really know Maekar. He doesn't really love Maekar. They've failed to make a connection. And that is why Egg's connection with Dunk is so important. And I think that, Maekar seeing this, maybe this is part of why Maekar refuses for Egg to go off with Dunk, because Maekar is like, I've got to hold on to Egg. Like, he's turning into a kinslayer. He's turning into a monster. I've got to hold him and change him and shape him. Remember when Maekar in episode 2 said, Darren will change or I will kill Darren. Like, that is Maekar's parenting style. Maekar is like, I will force you until you break. And obviously that is not working, but Maekar doesn't know what else to do. So Maekar doesn't want to let go of Egg, but I think ultimately it's for the best that Egg leaves Maekar. So just when this incredibly traumatic moment is happening, Dunk comes in, which is like not a great time for this meeting. But Dunk is waiting to talk to Maekar, and Gwyn Ashford appears. So Gwyn Ashford is the daughter of Lord Ashford. This is Lord Ashford's castle. This was Lord Ashford's tournament. And this whole tournament was supposedly a celebration of Gwyn Ashford's birthday. They call it Name Day in Westeros. And I think that Gwyn is understandably disappointed. Gwyn Ashford was hoping that this birthday would be fun. Maybe there would be some pass the parcel. Maybe there would be lemon cakes. Maybe it would be a nice time. Maybe people would pay a little bit of attention to Gwyn on her birthday, one would hope. But no, her birthday turned into a bloodbath. Her birthday party turned into 14 knights killing each other with swords in the mud. And this is not what she was promised. This is not what she wanted. But Gwyn, I think, in a very mature and compassionate way, comes up to Dunk and says, hey, my birthday was ruined, but I don't blame you. I think that it sucks what Arian and the princes did to you, and I think that you did the right thing. And then she walks off. And that's so cool. Like, remember the previous Gwyn scene was when Gwyn came up to Dunk and said, you're big and stupid, blah, and then she, like, scampers off. So, you know, like, Gwyn acts like a child sometimes, but I think she acts really mature here and thoughtful. And, hell yeah. Good on you, Gwyn. Hell yeah. Gwyn is still wearing her crown of flowers, which is the symbol of the Queen of Love and Beauty. Because, like, part of the idea of this tournament, at least in the books, is that the 5 champions of the tournament decide at the end whether Gwyn will remain crowned as the Queen of Love and Beauty. So I guess at least Gwyn still has her crown. At least Gwyn is still the reigning Queen of Love and Beauty. At least there's that. But yeah, it's been tough. Very, very magnanimous of Gwyn. Very cool of Gwyn to forgive her. Remember that line about a Dothraki wedding is considered a dull affair if there are not at least 4 deaths. There were 3 deaths at Gwyn Ashford's birthday party. So I guess it's considered a dull affair in Dothraki terms. So Dunk comes to Maekar and says, all right, I will take Egg as squire, but not at Summerhall. I will not do it if he has to live the life of a prince. I will not do it if Egg has to stay with his toxic family, Maekar and Daeron and Arian. I want to take Egg on the road because Dunk believes that the life of Arlen, the simple, humble life of a hedge knight, is a better life and will be better for Egg, as Daeron said. And again, that Daeron scene, like most of these scenes, are not in the book. So I think it's really interesting that they added Daeron's intervention as part of what makes Dunk accept Egg, which is really cool. Maekar is offended at the idea that Egg is better off without his family, as you would be, even if it's true. And Maekar is offended at the idea that Prince Aegon Targaryen, Egg, should live a life in ditches and inns and roadsides. They believe that princes are above that kind of life. Like, Egg living like a peasant, it's an affront to the whole idea of royalty. It's an affront to the whole idea of Targaryen superiority. It undermines the whole social hierarchy. But Dunk says that's what's better for Egg. Ultimately, Maekar says, he's my last boy. He's my last son. And, like, I love how after all of his pride and all of his harshness, Maekar shows vulnerability. He shows that he loves Egg, even if he's a bad dad, even if he doesn't communicate well. He loves Egg, and Egg is his last son. And there's sort of multiple meanings there, because Egg is literally the last born of Maekar's sons. But last son, I think, also means Egg is the last son who might be decent. Maekar has given up on Daeron being a good man. Maekar has given up on Arian being a good man. Maekar seems to have given up on Aemon. Maekar is the father of Aemon, Maester Aemon from Game of Thrones, and Aemon is currently down in the south at Old Town studying to become a Maester. None of his sons meet Maekar's standards or expectations of what a good son should be, which, I don't know, I guess is a son who's good at jousting and is strong and respectable. I guess that's what Maekar wants. And I think that Maekar sees Egg as Maekar's last hope of a son who meets his expectations. I don't know if Egg ever would. I don't know if Maekar's pressure and Maekar's parenting would make Egg a good man. That probably is not the case, and that's why Egg wants to take him away. So yeah, I love seeing this vulnerability from Maekar, and so Maekar leaves, and so it seems as though Maekar is saying, no, I do not give permission for you to take Egg because I can't bear to part with my boy Egg. Remember when during the trial of combat, Makar saw Dunk beating Arian, and Makar ran and tried to save Arian from Dunk. He said, my boy, my boy. And so I love the paradox of Makar being a bad father, but still a father who loves his children, who needs to let go. So Dunk leaves defeated. Now, in the book, Egg then turns up at Dunk's camp and says, Makar told me to go with you. So in the books, it seems as though Makar did, in the end, decide to let Egg go with Dunk. But in the show, there's a scene at the very end where Makar says, where the hell is Egg? I didn't give him permission to leave. So that's a change in the show that decides that Makar doesn't let Egg go. And personally, I dislike that change, because I really like Makar's humility in deciding that Dunk is right. I think it's really beautiful for a hard ass like Makar to decide that Dunk is right. I have to let go of my son Egg. But that is changed in the show. So Dunk decides to ride off alone, and he sees Sweetfoot. Sweetfoot is one of the 3 horses of Arlen and Dunk. Thunder is the warhorse. Chestnut is the old useless swayback stot. And Sweetfoot is the palfrey, the comfortable riding horse. And Dunk sold Sweetfoot in episode 2 so that Dunk had the money to buy armor. And Dunk promised to come back and buy Sweetfoot back if Dunk won in the tournament and made some money. But Dunk never got to ride in the tournament. He fought in a trial by combat, but he never got to ride in the tournament, and he never got to make any money. So Dunk was not able to buy Sweetfoot back. In the books, Dunk still has not bought Sweetfoot back. Dunk has not thought about Sweetfoot again. Maybe in a later Dunk and Egg book, Dunk eventually will make enough money to buy Sweetfoot back. But here in the show, they make a change where Raymond Fossaway buys Sweetfoot for Dunk, which is so beautiful. Raymond is such a good friend. He's always offering Dunk food. He helped him in the trial by combat multiple times, gives him a big hug when he's feeling down. Raymond is such a good friend. And yet, in a way, Dunk still has more closeness with Red. And so Raymond gives Sweetfoot to Dunk so that Dunk can keep Sweetfoot. But Dunk decides to leave Sweetfoot with Raymond because Sweetfoot will be happier with Raymond. In the books, Arlen and Dunk often buy an apple for Sweetfoot out of kindness. And Raymond is an apple farmer, so an apple farm seems like a fantastic place for Sweetfoot to live. So it's an act of kindness for Dunk to leave Sweetfoot with Raymond. Raymond says that Sir Lionel Baratheon wants you for a stag. I think that by stag, Raymond means Baratheon soldier. Like, Lannister soldiers are sometimes called lions. I think Baratheon soldiers could be called stags. Although the word stag has multiple meanings. A stag can be a kind of party, and Lionel likes to party. A stag can be a silver coin. So I think the wording, it's kind of confusing, ambiguous wording. But the point is that Lionel wanted Dunk to go with him and go to Storm's End, but Dunk has decided not to go with Lionel, not to go to Summerhall. Dunk will be like Arlen and will be a traveling hedge knight, just like Arlen was. So again, like, the whole point of this story is that Dunk has met all of these amazing people. He's had all these experiences. He's met Raymond, he's met Baelor and Makar and Arian and Egg and the Hardings and the Humphreys and the Robins, and Dunk is like, yeah, some of you guys are cool, some of you guys are terrible, but the person who I idolize, the person who I want to be like, is Arlen. Like, Dunk has learned things, he's sacrificed things, he's won, he's lost, he's suffered, and he's like, you know what? I want to follow in Arlen's footsteps like I always did from the beginning. And I think that's so cool that Dunk remains who he is because Arlen is the person who had the best influence on him. And Arlen was flawed, and Arlen was drunk, and Arlen was a bit crazy, and Arlen never knighted Dunk, but Arlen still gave Dunk the moral values that he lives by today. And if nothing else, he was a friend to Dunk when Dunk needed it. So it's beautiful. So this is the only life that makes sense to Dunk, and so that's the life that he lives. Raymond says that he's going to open a new cider barreling outfit. which is a reference to the house that Raymond founds, House Fossaway of New Barrel, which is the name of his Fossaway offshoot house with the green Appell Fossaway sigil instead of Stefan's red Fossaway sigil, which is called the Fossaways of Cider Hall, a split between the Fossaways that still exists 90 years later in the main series. And so Dunk and Raymond part ways. And so it's a nice little friendship, but they decide to part. And there's a surprisingly long little shot where Dunk just walks over and looks out at nature. And I think it's a cool moment where Dunk is just sort of like communing with nature and feeling like, yeah, like this is the right decision. I would rather be in the outdoors as a hedge knight rather than hanging out with princes in a palace. This is the right place for me, which is so lovely. So then Dunk pulls the penny out of Arlen's sword. So this is a change from the books. Arlen has a penny in his sword, and so maybe this penny is the coin that Arlen took down from the tree at Penny Tree. Like, presumably Arlen hammered a penny onto the tree when Arlen first went off to war, and I guess he took that penny down when he survived the war, and he put it in his hilt to hang on to it. And so now Dunk decides to hammer the penny onto this tree. And so I think this is a way of commemorating Arlen's death and paying homage to his master, who he is choosing to emulate now. And it's a good way to make the audience cry. I think that this coin could also represent Dunk, because Dunk is now riding off to new adventures and new battles, and so maybe this coin will commemorate Dunk's death if Dunk dies without coming back. The coin could also commemorate the deaths of Baylor and Humphrey Harding and Humphrey Beesbury. If we want to get persnickety, you'll see that the coin has a star on it, the seven-pointed star of the Faith of the Seven. And technically, a copper star is a different coin to a copper penny. There are a bunch of different copper coins mentioned in the books, including copper stars, groats, half pennies. And so I don't know if the Game of Thrones show is making a distinction between the different kinds of copper coins. It's not a big deal, but yeah, it does appear to be a copper star rather than a penny. But they don't call it copper star tree, they call it penny tree. Also, if we want to be persnickety, you'll notice that there's no nail hole in the coin. It doesn't seem like they literally put a nail through the coin. They just sort of like hammer the coin into the tree. At least that's what Dunk does. But let's not think about it too much. So, yeah, even after his adventures, it's Arlen who Dunk looks up to, the father who he chose. And then Egg turns up, just at the last minute. And Dunk is talking to his horses. His horses are now his best friends again. But then Egg turns up, and Egg has shaved his head and he's wearing peasant's clothes, so he's rejecting the princely identity and being Egg, squire to Dunk, again. And Egg is lying, saying that Maekar agreed for Egg to join Dunk, which in the books seems to be true, but in the show, Egg seems to be lying. I like this reaction from Dunk, where Dunk is obviously touched that he's reunited with Egg, and like Egg is also suppressing a smile. And, you know, instead of like hugging and weeping and being overjoyed to be together, they choose to fall into the formal role of knight and squire. Dunk says, "Call me sir," and you have to look after the horse. And so, you know, they're playing the role of knight and squire in the sort of formal, rigid way, because that is a system that works and feels right, and they're comfortable in those roles. And so that's what they choose to do. Dunk doesn't know where they're going to go. Dunk says there are 7 kingdoms, and then Egg says there are 9 kingdoms. And Egg is correct. So, like, Westeros is called the 7 kingdoms, even though there aren't 7 kingdoms. There used to be 7 kingdoms 210 years ago. So if we pull up the map on screen, so the 9 kingdoms today are North, Iron Islands, Riverlands, Vale, Westerlands, Crownlands, Reach, Stormlands, Dawn. But before Aegon the Conqueror took over Westeros, there were no Crownlands because there was no crown of Westeros, And the Iron Islands and the Riverlands were one kingdom at that time, because King Harrenhal of the Ironborn took over the Riverlands as well as the Iron Islands. So at that time, the Seven Kingdoms were distinct, separate kingdoms ruled by kings. That's where the name the Seven Kingdoms comes from. After Aegon took over and the Targaryens took over and created the Crown Lands and separated the Iron Islands and the Riverlands, it went from 7 to 9 kingdoms, and they're no longer kingdoms because there aren't 7 kings. There's like regions now that are ruled over by the Targaryens. So the term Seven Kingdoms is an anachronism, and I don't think they've ever acknowledged that in any of the TV shows. After all these years, they are finally acknowledging that the term Seven Kingdoms is an anachronism and doesn't really make sense, and they even highlight it by putting it in this title, A Knight of the Nine Kingdoms. Which is funny and goofy, but I think that it's also highlighting that every part of the title of this show is technically wrong. Because not only are there not 7 kingdoms, there are 9 regions, Dunk is not a knight, because Arlen didn't knight Dunk. So he's not a knight of the 7 kingdoms, and there aren't 7 kingdoms, which I think is really funny. From the very beginning, like when this show was announced, like a lot of people, I thought that this title is a bad title. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is way too long and not specific. It's a bad title. Like, I feel like people refer to this show as Dunk and Egg rather than A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. It's also a god-awful acronym. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, a Kotska. No one wants to say a Kotska. People like saying Hot D for House of the Dragon. Although people don't even call it House of the Dragon. People call it House of Dragons. Like, I've seen lots of people, including actual actors from the show, saying House of Dragons instead of House of the Dragon. So House of the Dragon is clearly not a very good title either. Game of Thrones, that's a great title. It's concise, it's descriptive. Game of Thrones, it rolls off the tongue. Game of Thrones, good title. House of the Dragon, a bit awkward, although Hot D is fun. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, a Kotska, god-awful title. And as it turns out, incorrect in multiple different ways, because he's not a knight and there aren't 7 kingdoms. So I think it's really fun how they lampshade in the show that the show's name is wrong and dumb. Not many shows have the courage to acknowledge that their title is dumb. I'm sure their fear was George R. R. Martin on his blog was saying, we might call the show Dunk and Egg, but Dunk and Egg sounds like a comedy duo, and we don't want people to think this show is a comedy. As it turns out, this show kind of is a comedy. So, maybe Dunk and Egg would have been a good title, but I guess they wanted people to realize that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, it's a show about Game of Thrones. It's a Westeros show, and I guess that's why they put 7 kingdoms into the title. But I don't think that even works. I think there are lots of people who don't make the connection that 7 kingdoms means Game of Thrones. And also, in all of the marketing, they say, like, Game of Thrones, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, HBO original, from the mind of George R. R. Martin, : I don't think it's a good title, is what I'm trying to say. Rant over. So Egg lies and says Maekar gave him permission to go off with Dunk, and Dunk is about to say we should go to Dorne. Dunk is saying, I suppose we could go anywhere in the 7 kingdoms, though I've never been to and then Egg interrupts him. So Dunk was about to say Dorne. And then Egg says, yeah, we should go to Dorne because I hear they have good puppet shows. So both Dunk and Egg want to go to Dorne because of Tansel. Tansel, the puppet girl, is from Dorne, and Dunk would like to see her again because he has a big crush on her. So they're like, well, I guess we might as well go to Dorne. Why not? So they go to Dorne. To find new adventures. So it's funny that, like, this whole story, it's kind of an origin story for Dunk and Egg. This is almost like a prologue. This is only the very beginning of their story, and there are 2 more Dunk and Egg books published, and George Martin has plans for 10 or 12 more Dunk and Egg stories, which he has shown to showrunner Ira Parker. And HBO has said that they will adapt the second and third Dunk and Egg books into the second and third seasons. They are filming season 2 right now. And HBO and the showrunners have said that they might make more seasons based on George R. R. Martin's future plans. George R. R. Martin has said that he has recently been working on writing the 4th and 5th Dunk and Egg books, which the working titles of which are The She-Wolves of Winterfell and The Village Hero, based in the North and the Riverlands, respectively. So there are potentially many more adventures to come, which is exciting. So Dunk and Egg ride off into the sunset, and we see Arlen. We see like the ghost of Arlen, or the memory of Arlen, riding along with them, but then peeling off and going in his own direction. And Arlen goes past this tree. And the tree, like there was a tree where Arlen died, and so the tree is such a potent symbol of life and death and continuity. And so we see how, like, you know, Arlen was the master to Dunk, and now Dunk is the master to Arlen. Arlen was there for Dunk when Dunk needed him. Now Dunk is there when Egg needed him. And so it just celebrates this beautiful passage of chosen fathers, chosen friends, chosen family, being good to each other, loving each other, teaching each other good moral values in this hostile, crazy world. And after all of these different crazy characters, Lionel and Baelor and Maekar and Manfred Bloody Dondarrion, after all of those crazy characters and all those experiences, what Dunk really affirms and what Dunk really chooses and what Dunk really believes in is simple humility and heroism. So it's just gorgeous, isn't it? So there is tragedy and there's cynicism in this story. There's the death of Baelor, there's the cruelty of Aerion, there's the cowardice of Daeron. But the ending is so hopeful and idealistic and romantic, celebrating the humility and heroism of Arlen and Dunk and Egg. George R. R. Martin's stories, they do explore so much evil and cruelty and violence and corruption in the world. They show the injustice of politics and power. They show how our dreams don't come true the way that we hope. Our ideals are sometimes corrupted. There's failure and cruelty. But this ending is a celebration of hope and ideals and heroism and romanticism, the emotion and hope of Florian the Fool and Dunk and Arlen. So it's because the world is so dark and because the world is unjust, that's why our hopes and dreams and foolish heroism are so essential. Even in the face of disillusionment and darkness and cruelty, that's why we need our hopes and dreams and foolish heroes. This story is about what does it mean to be a hero. This story asks what does it mean to be a knight. And it argues that knighthood isn't about swinging a sword real good. It's not about swearing an oath. It's not about being highborn or rich or fancy or noble or having special magic dragon blood from the special magic dragon family. Dunk is none of those things. Dunk is not a skilled swordsman. He didn't swear the knight's oath. He's not from a special family. But Dunk is a dreamer, an idealist, a romantic who tries to do what's right. And he's not smart. He doesn't make the smart choices, but he makes the heroic choices out of emotion and idealism. And that's what makes him a hero, and that's what this story is about. And then there's one little extra scene at the end. We see Aerion being dragged off to Lys. We see Daeron looking pretty miserable with a wineskin in his hand. We see Valar looking stern, facing the reality that he is now the heir to the throne. And then we see Maekar trying to find Aegon, because it turns out that Maekar did not give permission for Egg to go off with Dunk. Egg lied and went off without Maekar's permission. Oh, you can also see Kiera of Tyrosh in the background with her pink hair there. And some of the other Targaryen extras, the old guy and one of the younger girls. I would like to know who those other Targaryens are meant to be, if anyone. They might not have any particular character in mind. But yeah, they end with this little sort of comedic twist at the end that Maekar didn't give permission, which I personally don't love. I mean, even just tonally, like this ending with Arlen and Dunk and Egg is so perfect. It's such a nice ending. Did they need to tack the Maker thing on the end? I don't know. I think that might be a little indulgent. And also, like, it raises questions about, like, there will be consequences to Egg running off, right? Like, Maker will probably try to find Egg and bring him back, right? Like, there might be men out looking for Dunk and Egg now. There might be issues and consequences which don't happen in the book. So, yeah, it's sort of an interesting little twist that they've added on the end. So this episode is one of the less faithful to the books, because most of the scenes in this episode are not in the book. Most of the other episodes are very faithful. This episode is not as faithful. And, some of these changes do kind of contradict the book, like Maker not giving permission. So overall, I would say that this season is very faithful to the book, but this particular episode is not as faithful to the book. It's mostly invented. There were also no gross bodily fluid moments in this episode, were there? Episode 1 had Dunk pooping, and episode 2 had Arlen's enormous phallus, and it had Thunder pooping. Episode 1 had Plumber spitting. Episode 5 had 4 pukes, a lot of vomit. Episode 4 had a big fart from Otho Bracken. There are no farts or poops or vomit in this episode, although I suppose there is piss, because Lionel Baratheon pisses and Red empties a chamber pot, so maybe that is our requisite bodily fluid moment for the episode. I think that the editing and the directing is maybe a little less playful and kooky and creative in this particular episode. Like, I think that episode 3 had some really fun, kooky, creative cinematography and editing, like the quick comedic shots jumping between the different characters when Egg reveals his identity. But overall, I think it's a fantastic episode. I think that it really... I think that what it adds does a lot to sort of marinate in Dunk's decision-making and Dunk's values, and that heart of the story about Dunk's humility and idealism versus the privileged prince's lifestyle. I think that is carried across well, and I think that so many of the moments with the side characters are so delightful. I think Lionel Baratheon is so fun and charismatic and delightful, and I think that Red is so fun and surprising and thematically relevant. I think that the Maker performances and the Egg performances are great, and the Arlen scene is heartbreaking. And of course, the Beesbury coffin is maybe the best thing that I've ever seen. So personally, I loved this episode. I think that this is one of my favorite Game of Thrones episodes, and I think that this is one of my favorite Game of Thrones seasons ever. I love this season of TV more than I love most of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. So I think it's great, but let me know what you think. How do you think this season compares to the other shows? I mean, it's hard to compare because the other shows are so different. This show is so small and contained and character-driven and comedic and sweet and silly, whereas the other shows, especially House of the Dragon, is so, like, serious and political and bombastic and heavy. And Game of Thrones, of course, is a complicated beast because the first seasons are quite beautifully written and thoughtful, and the later seasons start to become a bit shit. So, I don't know, it's all kind of hard to compare. So as I said, there is a second season of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms being filmed now, and that'll come out in 2027. HBO says that they'll make a third season based on the third book coming out in 2028, presumably, because they said that it would be annual. And theoretically, there could potentially be as many as 10 or 12 more seasons based on George Martin's ideas, but whether or not that'll happen, who knows. But there is much more coming, so we're going to talk about it, so make sure you like and subscribe to Walt Shift X. Did you know that it has now been 10 years of making videos about every episode of Game of Thrones? 10 years! We started this in 2016. 2016 was when we started making weekly videos about Game of Thrones Season 6. And then we made weekly videos about Season 7 and Season 8. And we did House of the Dragon Season 1 and Season 2, and now Dunk and Egg, and now it's been 10 years. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for being a part of this. Thanks especially to everyone who subscribes on Nebula and supports on Patreon. You'll help make this possible. Also, thank you to Glidus. Glidus is part of the Alt-Shift-X team. Glidus does most of the video editing with these weekly videos. And Glidus also works with Alt-Shift-X on Dunk Time. I will forgive Glidus for working with my evil twin, Alt-Shift-X. They did a whole bunch of videos, and it wouldn't have been possible without Glidus. So check out Glidus's YouTube channel and Glidus's band, his rock band, Materia. I'll put links in the description. Thank you to all of the wonderful people in the Ice and Fire community. There are lots of people doing great analysis and podcasts and YouTube videos and fan art. So thank you to everyone in that community, and thank you to Schubert Reads for moderating the live chat. You can check out some audiobooks read by Schubert on Schubert Reads' channel. Alt-Shift-X is making more videos about Westeros. We're making more videos about Dune. That's one of the big goals this year, is to finish a whole bunch of big videos about Dune, so that's going to be exciting. Dune, Dune, tomato, tomato. So follow Alt-Shift-X on YouTube, on Patreon. We do updates and extra special stuff and bonus content on Nebula. You can follow on Blue Sky or Twitter or Instagram or whatever you'd like. We also have several podcast feeds. Links are below. I know it's confusing because we've got a lot of different things in different places, but if you're ever confused about where to find Alt-Shift-X stuff, go to altshiftx.com. Links to everything are at altshiftx.com. So part of this has been made possible by Nebula, and Nebula has a bunch of exclusive content by Alt-Shift-X and by Alt-Shift-X and Glidus. On this week's episode of Dunk Time, Glidus and Alt-Shift-X discuss the finale of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms for 3 hours. They compare the episode to Tolkien's Scouring of the Shire. They discuss the surprising credits music, and they have some pretty good bee puns. So if you want to hear Glidus and Alt-Shift-X's top 5 Beesbury bee puns, check out Dunk Time. It is linked in the video description. Alt-Shift-X and Glidus discussed every episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. They discussed every episode of House of the Dragon. And they made a 22-hour-long video about Jon Snow, and you can watch all of it on Nebula. This is over 67 hours of exclusive Alt and Glidus videos. I think it's actually 69 hours now. We just reached 69 hours of exclusive content on Nebula. You can listen to all of it as audio on podcast apps using the Nebula podcast feed. And of course, Nebula has exclusive videos from hundreds of other great creators. Nebula is an independent, creator-owned site. So signing up is a good way to support Alt-Shift-X and many other creators. With my link in the description, you can get 50% off an annual subscription, making the price just $30 for a year. So if you're a green, unripe apple, sign up at nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X. Or if you're a wormy red apple, sign up at nebula.tv/Alt-Shift-X. Links below. But yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to respond to as many of your donation questions as I can, and then later we will enter the spoiler zone, and we will discuss spoilers. So, I will pull up your donation questions and such, and it's going to be a yeehaw good time. One moment, please, as I pull up the Streamlabs. Pressing buttons on the computer. Yeah. Alright, we're almost there. If you do want to ask a question, the best way to donate is using the Streamlabs link in the video description. That is better than Super Chats, because if you use a Super Chat in the YouTube interface, Google takes a large chunk of the money. So it is better to use Streamlabs. But either way, I appreciate you. Alright. Let's respond to your questions. Thank you, Kurt, who says, thanks for all the perspective, Alt-Shift-X. I'm now convinced that Sir Pennytree, Arlen, was never knighted, hence avoiding it with Dunk. Yeah, I think that's a fun theory on why Arlen didn't knight Dunk. Maybe Arlen was also lying about his knighthood and didn't want to pass on a false knighthood. It's like how Dunk didn't want to knight Raymond. Also, maybe like Dunk literally didn't know the words to the Knight's Oath, and maybe Arlen literally didn't know the words. I mean, the first line of this show is I don't know any words. So maybe that's part of it. Thank you, Mod Mary, who says, why don't people blame Arian for Baelor's death? It was his actions that caused the trial. Yeah, well, I'm sure some people do blame Arian, and they should blame Arian. Something that George Martin explores often is that people have different opinions about stuff, and rumor twists the story. There's all sorts of crazy rumors that fly around, like when Ned gets executed, and some people are like, Ned was plotting with Stannis. No, Ned was plotting with Renly. No, Ned stabbed Robert. No, it was a pig. The pig stabbed Robert. You know, like, there's all sorts of crazy opinions. They didn't have Twitter, but they had rumor, and rumor is almost as bad. So I'm sure some people do blame Arian. Thank you, S, who says, needs a stern hand. Seems out of place. Yeah, I thought so too, S. So, in the show, Dunk says that Egg is a good boy, he just needs a stern hand. And I agree that that's an odd line, because Maekar is a stern hand, right? Maekar is a stern, harsh person and a stern, harsh father. And Maekar's stern, harsh parenting is part of the problem of why Arian and Darren are having a tough time being good humans. So yeah, it's a little odd. But I mean, you know, Arlen was a stern hand to Dunk. Like, the beginning of this show had a montage of Arlen slapping Dunk in the head repeatedly. So sternness is part of the equation here. But I think that Dunk shows Egg love as well as some sternness. And I think that maybe it's a balance of sternness and love that Egg needs and that Dunk provides. Thank you, S, who says, Dunk not hesitating and having to be asked to speak up before trashing the two princes was also a somewhat disappointing change. Yeah, so in the conversation with Maekar, Maekar is saying, why would you take Egg on the road? Egg is a prince, he should be pampered at Summerhall. And then Dunk says, well, Arian ate only good food, and Darren never slept in a ditch. Darren only slept in comfortable beds. And so Dunk is saying that the luxurious life of princes contributed to Darren and Arian being dickwads. And in the book, Dunk does not immediately confidently say that about Darren and Arian. In the book, Dunk hesitates, and Maekar says, spit it out, what are you trying to say? And then Dunk says, Darren and Arian were pampered. So, yeah, I think that Dunk is more confident in the show, and that's similar to the moment in episode 2 where Dunk deliberately goes and talks to Prince Baelor and Maekar, whereas in the book, Dunk accidentally stumbled into that situation, and Dunk was not brave and confident enough to deliberately talk to the princes. So, yeah, there is a difference there. Thank you, Cop Brook, who said, did George R.R. Martin give the green light for the finale's end? Well, George Martin says that he was a big part of creating this show, and that George Martin and Ira Parker collaborated closely in outlining and writing this show. And they say that George Martin gave notes on the scripts of these episodes, and they went back and forth on stuff. For example, the pooping thing was something that surprised George in the first episode, and he and Ira talked about it, and George gave feedback, and Ira sometimes changed things based on George's feedback. So I don't know what George said about the particular final scene of this particular episode, but George and Ira say that they collaborated and worked closely on this show. And Ira says that it was really his goal to please George and to do a faithful adaptation. So from all accounts, it seems like George is happy with this show. In contrast to George's unhappiness with House of the Dragon, George has a more fractious relationship with the House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal, unfortunately. Thank you, Lizard Liz, who says, overall, a good episode, but I wish instead of the cut on Darren's face, we got him walking on a broken foot to be more in line with the events of the books. Yeah, so in the book, it says that Darren may have a broken foot after he was stepped on by his own horse, after he fell down in the trial, which I think is fun. Like, Darren falls down because he doesn't want to get hurt, but falling down causes him to get hurt by his own horse, which is almost a funny little self-fulfilling prophecy thing, isn't it? You know, prophecy bites your prick off every time, huh? Yeah, I mean, maybe it would have been good if they showed Darren with his broken foot, but I mean, they already showed Dunk limping heavily, and they showed Lionel limping heavily on a walking stick. Did we really need Darren also limping heavily? Would Darren the Drunken have had a cool Targaryen walking stick with a Targaryen dragon on the stick to match Lionel's antlered stag walking stick? I don't know. Thank you, Stephen A. Spliff, who says, spoiler. Okay, we'll talk about that later. We'll save that for the spoiler zone. We're not in the spoiler zone yet. Thank you, Josh Whalen, who says, glad that Dunk's knighting remains ambiguous. I hope the BA in political science on my work resume remains equally uninvestigated. Have you been lying on your resume, Josh Whalen? Yeah, so the scene with Arlen, I think, tells us that Arlen didn't knight Dunk. But there is still some ambiguity, because we don't see Arlen die. We see Arlen before he dies, we see Arlen after he dies. It is theoretically possible that Arlen might have knighted Dunk after the conversation that he has with Dunk, where Dunk asks, why didn't you knight me? So maybe Arlen did knight Dunk at some point. Maybe we'll get a flashback to Arlen knighting Dunk at some point in the future. But I think that what makes the story interesting is the idea that Dunk told this great lie. And the ambiguity keeps our brains ticking on it in a fun way. I think it's similar to how, you know, I think that Maker killing Baelor was an accident, but I also think that a little bit of ambiguity, a little bit of it was almost certainly an accident, that ambiguity keeps it interesting and keeps us engaged with that question. I think that giving us an absolute answer might sort of turn our brains off when it's more interesting to keep it a little bit open. Thank you, Brinks, who says, did Dunk kill Arlen? We see that arm cut right after their training fight in the first episode. Did Dunk cause that wound? That's an interesting question, Brinks. I don't think that Dunk caused that wound, because we see the wound on Arlen's arm before we see Dunk and Arlen sparring. I think that it's weird that Dunk and Arlen are training at fighting when Arlen has a wounded arm. Like, wouldn't his wounded arm hurt too much to spar? Or maybe Arlen is just so tough and so tenacious that he trains and fights Dunk even with a wounded arm. It's all a little bit unclear to me. Like, it's strange that in that scene with Arlen is presumably dying. Arlen is presumably on the brink of death, but he doesn't really show, like, signs of being dying, or, like, it's at least not obvious why he's dying. Like, he's got the wound on his arm, but, like, is it the wound that's killing him? In the books, it says that Arlen dies of a chill. He got sick, but he doesn't seem sick in the scene this episode. So it's not super clear to me what killed Arlen in the show. I assume the wound contributed to it. Maybe it would have been better if he seemed, like, feverish. You know, if he was, like, sweating or shaking, or, like, so we could, like, see that, yeah, he was dying. It's a little bit odd to me that isn't as obvious as it could have been. Thank you, B-Jack, who says, what did you think of this episode and the show overall, giving Aerion more depth? Obviously still evil, but he's a lot more well-rounded in the show. Yeah, I liked the moment where Dunk hits Aerion, and then Aerion looks at Dunk and is like, why did you throw your life away? And I like how you can see that Aerion is genuinely puzzled and genuinely curious Like, Arian genuinely wants to know why Dunk would be stupid enough to attack him to protect Tanzel. And I think that's fun. And I think that showing Arian's fear is good. Like, in the scene with the Lords, when Arian tries to refuse Dunk's trial of combat, and Maekar says, no, you can't refuse. And so showing Arian trying to weasel out of it shows Arian's fear and vulnerability in a way that I think makes him a little more layered. In the book, Arian seems a bit more mad. He seems a bit more crazy. And like I said, I think that making characters mad is sometimes a bit of a cop-out. It makes it less interesting if you're just labeling someone as crazy and not thinking more deeply about their motivations. So yeah, I agree that Arian has maybe a little bit more depth in the show than he does in the book. Although I do think it's a loss that we lost a bit of Arian's riz. Because Arian in the books is flamboyant. He wears colourful clothes in yellow, orange, and red. He calls himself the Bright Prince and Bright Flame. And that visual imagery has meaning when Arian gets dragged through the mud and we realize that his flamboyant, fantastic, superior raiment is a facade, and it's a lie, and it's an illusion, and he's not better than anyone else. Thank you, Jazz Falcon, who says, Arlen says, a true knight always finishes his story. Subtle reference to a certain fantasy author. Yeah, so George R.R. Martin has not finished the main book series of Game of Thrones. George Martin has not finished the Dunk and Egg books. George Martin has not finished the Fire and Blood history book series. And in fact, George Martin has never finished a book series. George Martin has started many book series, including like sci-fi and fantasy series in the 80s and 70s. And George Martin has not finished any of them. George Martin said in Dream Songs that his career is littered with the corpses of unfinished series. George Martin is still saying that he will write The Winds of Winter and then he will write A Dream of Spring to finish the main Game of Thrones books. George Martin is saying that he wants to write more Dunk and Egg books, 10 more Dunk and Egg books to tell their whole life story. But as yet, he has not finished those books. And so, yes, I also thought of George Martin when Arlen says, a true knight always finishes a story. And I hope that George Martin finishes his stories. Thank you, Winifree iPhone 4, who says, I agree with the dislike of Maekar refusing to let Egg go with Dunk. I found him conceding to Dunk really satisfying and surprisingly complex in the original story. Still laughed at the ending, though. Yeah, I personally prefer in the book that it seems that Maekar agrees to let Egg go because it's such a beautiful act of humility from Maekar. But it is also fun at the end of this episode when Maekar is pissed off and it turns out that Egg lied. So, it's an interesting twist. And I guess it's something that, like, maybe in a later season of the show, there could be a moment with Maekar where Maekar says, okay, I do agree now. Maybe there could be a similar or even a bigger moment in a later season with Maekar. Maybe they're planning on doing something like that. Thank you, Fack, who also points out that George Martin has not yet finished his stories. Thank you, Sir Kermit the Frog, who says, my favourite addition to this show is Arlen's flashback, child beating and giant eggplant and all. He's a little more crazy and has more vices than I imagined, but I loved it. I like the idea that Arlen doesn't even know why he didn't knight Dunk. Yeah, so in the books, Arlen seems more normal. In the books, Arlen just seems like this good-natured, simple, humble knight. The TV show changes that a bit by making Arlen eccentric and making Arlen sing in Dothraki and get blackout drunk and wave his enormous penis around like a baseball bat. That's new. That's not in the book. I'm sure some people might dislike that change. Personally, I like it because it's very fun. It's a fantastic, charismatic performance by Danny Webb. And I think that in some ways it deepens that idea of Arlen being the heroic fool. And that idea that, sometimes the reality of things is not as important as what we choose it means, you know? Like it's not really important whether Arlen was a great knight so much as it's important that Dunk believes Arlen was a great knight, or Arlen was a great knight to Dunk. Like like Arlen taught Dunk these values, and Dunk believes in these values, and that helps Dunk be a good person. And that's true regardless of whether Arlen really was a good knight. It's not really the point whether Arlen was a great knight. And so it's the story and the ideals that matter, I think. And so I think that works. Thank you, Mode, who says, would be cool to go through the episode in the making on the stream, as well as the interviews with Ira, where he elaborates on the episode and some of the book changes. Yeah, so they do release an Inside the Episode feature for each episode of the show, and they release an official podcast with interviews, and they release a behind-the-scenes feature for each episode. We sometimes talk about some of that content in our scripted explained videos that will come out later in the week. Thank you, Vala Martinez, who says, my fiancé and I loved Gladys's instant interpretation of Robin when it is Madness bid as when I reckon it's time to go crazy on Dunk Time, and have officially nicknamed our adolescent dog Robin, a very willing vessel at all times. Yes, well, you got to go listen to Dunk Time on nebula.tv/AltSwiftX, because Glidus has some hot takes on this show. And if nothing else, you want to hear Glidus's shriek of rage when he saw the four-legged dragon sigil last episode. So yeah, go check out Dunk Time. It's 18 more hours of Dunk talk. You can listen to it on podcast feeds. Links in the description. Good way to support AltShiftX. Thank you, C. Brennan, who says, do you think Jon Snow's real name might be a Stark name? Maybe Brandon or Benjen? Yeah, so in the Game of Thrones TV show, they say that Jon Snow's real name is Aegon Targaryen, which is weird because Rhaegar Targaryen already had a son named Aegon Targaryen. The boy who was killed by Gregor and Armory, and there's a kid called Young Griff who claims to be Aegon Targaryen. So there's already at least one Aegon Targaryen in Game of Thrones alive in Jon's time, and so it would be very weird if Jon Snow was also Aegon Targaryen, right? So some people speculate about, well, maybe Jon Snow has a different name in the books. Maybe Jon is Jaehaerys or Aemon Targaryen. But yeah, maybe Brennan, maybe Jon has a more Stark name, like Brandon or Benjen or Ned. I guess it's an open question who named Jon. Like, did Rhaegar come up with a name for Jon Snow, or did Lyanna come up with a name for Jon Snow, or did Ned come up with Jon's name? I mean, the name Jon is named after Jon Arryn, who was like a father figure to Ned Stark at the Eyrie. So I think that Jon Snow is Ned's name. So I wonder if Lyanna or Rhaegar had a different name. Thank you. Well, I think, we have the vision of Rhaegar in the second book, where Rhaegar says he is the Song of Ice and Fire. So Rhaegar certainly had his own plans. Thank you, Max Dingus. I think Arlen had a Max Dingus. Max Dingus said, the gross part of this episode is seeing Raymond kiss Lady Rohan Weber. That ain't Lady Rohan Weber. That's Red, a.k.a. Lady Rowan. You know the actor's name, the actor who plays Red, her real name is Rowan Robinson. So the actor is Rowan Robinson playing Red, who is playing Lady Rowan. There's a tongue twister for you. Thank you, Clexton, who says, would you prefer Aegon's Conquest as a show or a movie? When do you think it'll be released? So they are developing and have been developing many different Game of Thrones shows for a long time. And one of the ideas that's been on and off development for years and years is an Aegon's Conquest show about when Aegon the First Targaryen took over Westeros 300 years before Game of Thrones. And I think that might make a good TV show or movie. I think that, a lot of people reckon it might be a bit samey, because if you read the story of Aegon's Conquest in the books, in the history book, it's mostly just this king rejected Aegon, so then Aegon burned him with his dragons. Like that's kind of what happens over and over in the story of Aegon's Conquest. And so I think that it'll be interesting to see like how you make Aegon's Conquest an interesting story. I think that Aegon and his sister wives Rhaenys and Visenya could be really interesting characters if you get into their relationships and their politics. I think that Visenya is low-key the most interesting character in Aegon's Conquest and in that era. So I think that Visenya might be an interesting center or focus for the show. And of course, the various kings and lords have their own eccentric personalities. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways you could adapt Aegon's Conquest. I think that it was reported that one pitch for an Aegon's Conquest show or movie depicted Aegon the Conqueror himself as a drunken lout, which would be surprising and contrary to the books. So yeah, no one knows if they will make an Aegon's Conquest show or if it'll just, remain undeveloped, but we'll see what happens. I think that, what's the current list of spin-off shows at the moment? Like they've made House of the Dragon, season 3 is airing this year. They've made Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and season 2 is coming next year. There has reportedly been a TV show about Nymeria and the 10,000 ships and the beginning of Dawn. That was reportedly in development, at least as of a couple of years ago. And yeah, there is reportedly an Aegon's Conquest show in development, and I think they've talked about doing that as a movie, if not as a TV show. There is an animated show about Corlys Velaryon and his 9 voyages in development. There are more animated shows in development, possibly including one about the Golden Empire of Yi Ti, which is like Game of Thrones China. There's been talk and rumors about a Jon Snow sequel show, and now there's talk about the show being centered on Arya Stark. There was a show about Fleabottom in development. There is a play called The Mad King coming out this year. And there are other ideas floating around. So yeah, this is kind of how Hollywood works, is my understanding. There's lots of different ideas floating around, and some of them, but not all of them, come to fruition. Thank you, Chorney, who says, "You the goat shifty, go easy on that bastard half-cousin of yours, Alt Swift X. He's not too bad. Oh, and tell Glidus to get back on Crusader Kings 3, Game of Thrones mod. Preesh, love ya." Yeah, look, I think that Swift is a bit silly. I think that Swift goes off on tangents, especially when that Glidus guy is around. We try to be a little more professional over here on Alt Shift X. We use citations and stuff, We're proper over here. But look, I got to admit that it was big of Alt Shift X to sponsor Alt Shift X this season. I've got to admit I was surprised to be promoting my evil half-twin in this season of videos. It wasn't my choice of sponsor to promote Alt Shift X, but you know what? I've listened to some Dunk Time and it's actually kind of fun. So if you want to listen, there's a link in the description. Vela Martinez says, "Was that a Dragon Ball Z abridged reference? I haven't seen Dragon Ball Z abridged, but I know that Glidus is a big fan. So ask Glidus about Dragon Ball Z abridged." Moose says, "Who do you think is winning a twerk-off, Tanzil or Red?" I'm guessing Red, because I feel like Tanzil is more of a kind of nervous, reserved person. Thank you, Giacalini, who says, 3 things with the last scene. 1, it's kind of a downgrade of Maekar's character evolution. Yeah, I think it gives Maekar less development. I think Maekar's decision to let Egg go in the book is a lovely moment of character development, so I kind of agree. Giacalini says, 2, Egg beginning his new life with Dunk is a lie. After all he already put him through is effed up. Yeah, that's true. I mean, one of the important moments is that Dunk felt betrayed, that Egg lied about his identity, and so when Dunk found out that Egg was actually a Targaryen, it took some time to get over that betrayal. And I guess that Egg's lie that Maekar agreed to let Egg go, it's another lie that puts Dunk in danger. Like, there might be Targaryen soldiers hunting for Dunk and Egg now. So Dunk, and maybe people will think that Dunk kidnapped Egg. So yeah, it is another dangerous lie that Egg is doing. So yeah, I agree, Giacalini. That is kind of effed up. And yeah, in the books, Egg has this Targaryen ring that he uses as like a backup just in case he needs to use it for safety to show that he is a prince in an emergency. And so that's like kind of something that supports the idea that Maekar did agree for Egg to leave, which he maybe doesn't have at this point in the show. Yeah, I mean, those are sort of questions for future seasons. But yeah, I agree. There are some inconsistencies that they'll have to address one way or another. Maybe there'll be a Maekar scene. Maybe there'll be a new Maekar scene in season 2 or 3 to make this make sense. Thank you, Vela Martinez, who says, S is me. Why does it say S? I do not know, Vela Martinez, but thank you for your support. Thank you, Sofix, who says, what did you think of Dunk's facial reactions this episode? So many made me laugh, especially to the new Fossaway couple. Thank you so much. Your voice has helped me sleep for 8 years. Well, 8 years is a long time to sleep, Sofix, so I hope you woke up after those 8 years. My goodness, that's a lot of sleeping. Well, Dunk's facial expressions were hard to do because he's got like makeup and like injuries all over his face, doesn't he? So it must be kind of hard to act through that. But yeah, I agree that Dunk's reactions to Red and Raymond's relationship in particular was pretty hilarious. And I also liked Sam Sproul's performance as Maekar. I mean, look, it's just pretty great acting all around. And like Daniel Ings as Lionel obviously is so impressive of a performance. I think they all did great. Thank you, Winner Free iPhone 4, who says, in case I don't catch the next stream, I want to say thanks for all the work. The Dunk Time vids on Nebula have been a great listen. Hopefully one of these days I can catch that Rapscallion Swift live and give him a clout on the ear. Yeah, give old Swift X a clout on the ear from me. And yeah, glad you're enjoying Dunk Time. There's a link to Dunk Time in the description. Thank you, Chloe, who says, could Tanzel be a Tarth? Love, Nebula, thanks to you and Glidus. Could Tanzel be a Tarth? I mean, they say that she's from Dawn, and she is not a noble highborn person. She's a commoner. So I don't think she's a Tarth. Maybe she could be a Tarth bastard. I don't know. Are you saying... Okay, so yeah, George Martin reportedly said, that Brienne is a descendant of Dunk. So a lot of people in the fandom have this question, this mystery of who does Dunk have sex with and who are Dunk's children and how do Dunk's children lead to Brienne. And I guess Chloe is saying, well, maybe Dunk hooks up with Tanzel one day and their children are ancestors of Brienne. And if Tanzel is a Tarth, that might be how Dunk's line leads to Brienne. So some people speculate that maybe Dunk hooks up with a Tarth, or hooks up with someone who then marries a Tarth, or hooks up with someone whose kid marries with the Tarths, because Brienne is of Tarth. There's actually, we actually see Dunk's shield on Tarth mentioned in one of the books. So yeah, there must be some connection between Dunk and the Tarths, or at least Dunk's children and one of the Tarths at some point. And yeah, it's an open question. It's an open question who that is. There are some other women who Dunk gets involved with in the later books, so maybe they are the ancestor of Brienne. Thank you, Threnody, who says, Maekar's quiet consoling of Egg and not punishing him for his intent to do Aryan harm was interesting. Yeah, well, I mean... That moment gets interrupted. Like, Maekar sees Egg trying to kill Aryan, and Maekar stops it, and then it gets interrupted. And I wonder, what was Maekar going to do about that afterwards? Was Maekar going to sit Egg down and say, hey, murdering your brother is bad? Or was Maekar going to never speak of it again? Or was Maekar going to beat Egg? Was Maekar going to punish Egg? What was Maekar's plan as a parent to handle that situation? I don't know. Probably nothing good, because we've seen that Egg is not close with Maekar, doesn't understand Maekar, doesn't feel happy with Maekar, so I don't know what Maekar's plan was there, but it might be best for everyone if Egg just gets the hell out of Dodge. Thank you, Jesse, who says, I'm unbelievably happy that we didn't see the House of the Dragon Valyrian prophecy dagger featured in this show. Also, I don't mind the ending much. They can always just have Maekar give his blessing in the future. No, I agree. I think maybe that's what they will do. I mean, I'd love to see Sam Sproul again, maybe there'll be another Maker scene where Maker does agree for Egg to go. Maybe that'll be something that happens early in season 2. There's actually, like, there's a year and a half between the first book and the second book, and Dunk and Egg have various adventures between the first and second books that are just briefly glossed over but not explored in detail. So I do wonder how they will handle that in season 2. Because you really could make a whole extra season about Dunk and Egg's adventures in Dawn. Or maybe you could have a quick montage at some point in season 2 of those adventures. Like, maybe you could have flashbacks to those adventures. So there's a lot of interesting ways that they could handle that. So I'm curious how that'll be adapted. Thank you, Awesome Name, who says, does Alt Shift X prefer A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms or House of the Dragon? I think that they're hard to compare because they're so different. I think that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 is like a better, more successful season of TV than House of the Dragon Season 2 is. Because I think that House of the Dragon Season 2 was flawed in its structure. It had the finale cut off. There's some of the character arcs are frustrating. I think House of the Dragon Season 1 is great, but Season 2 is definitely more flawed. So I think that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is less flawed, and I think that it's also more fun. And it's refreshing, and it's funny, and it's creative. So I think that A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms Season 1 is better than House of the Dragon Season 2. But House of the Dragon Season 1 is pretty awesome. And even House of the Dragon Season 2 has great moments. I think House of the Dragon Season 2 Episode 2 is one of my favorite Westeros episodes ever. I think it's amazing. So, yeah, maybe I prefer Dunk and Egg overall, but I still think House of the Dragon has a lot going for it, and I'm hopeful about House of the Dragon Season 3. Thank you, Insanity526, who says, do you think that beehive burials might be real? Ottoman Olivia Celebi tells a story of his Circassian host serving him honey from a hive in his dead father's coffin placed on a tree branch. Would you let Lord Beesbury sweeten your life one last time? I do not know if beehive burials are real. Surely somebody has been buried in a beehive at some point in history. I'm sure it's been done, but I don't know. Would you eat honey that came out of a coffin? I don't really want to eat corpse honey, personally, but I mean, I shouldn't knock it till I try it. Do you think that's what they do? Do you think they actually eat honey that was made inside Humphrey Beesbury's coffin? That sounds a bit ick. Would bees do that? Would bees make a hive around a corpse? Do they want... the bees probably don't want rotting meat inside their hive, do they? I don't know. It's icky. Twinson says, Egg is wrong. There isn't 9 kingdoms. There was 7 kingdoms during the conquest. After the conquest, there are 8 realms, 9 after Dawn. They aren't kingdoms anymore. Those kingdoms ended with the conquest. Harren had 3 of those, doesn't make them kingdoms. Yeah, well, they're certainly not kingdoms now, because the kingdoms don't have kings, so it's more like 9 regions. Or 8 regions and 1 administrative district around King's Landing. Like the Crownlands are like Washington, D.C. or something, I guess. Yeah, the reality is always more administratively complex than names would have you believe. There are lots of odd anachronisms in real-world history and politics, and the Seven Kingdoms name reflects that. Thank you, Sir Duncan the Average, who says, isn't the scene where Dunk asks Arlen why he wasn't knighted filmed in the exact same place where Dunk buries Arlen? Yes. Doesn't this mean that Arlen died shortly after? Yes. Also, Arlen didn't seem to be okay. He was struggling to finish what he wanted to say. Yeah, I think that Arlen was dying in that scene, and I think that he did die shortly afterwards. I think that if you really want to believe it, you can imagine that maybe Arlen knighted Dunk after that scene. So maybe Dunk really was knighted, but I think that what we're meant to believe, and I think that what the scene implies, is that Arlen never knighted Dunk. But maybe there's still a little bit of ambiguity. Maybe you can still believe Dunk is knighted if you really want to, but I don't think he was. Thank you, Bruh Watt, who says, Dunk equals J. Gatsby plus Forrest Gump. Gatsby rises to upper class under ambiguous circumstances and the mentorship of an old man. Forrest Gump is stupid and strong, but consistently lucks into important happenings and excelling. Yeah, I think those are good comparisons. I think George Martin talked about The Great Gatsby how Gatsby like looks across the water at the green light, and it's his desire to be part of that distant world that he longs for. And George has compared that to himself, I think, when George was in Bayonne, New Jersey, and he looked across the water at the lights of Manhattan, and he wished to be a part of a more exciting world. Just like Bran is stuck, confined in his chambers, wishing he could be part of the larger world. Just like Dunk, when he's imprisoned, listening to the sounds of the tourney, wishing he was part of this greater world. So, these books are chock full of longing, for sure. And Dunk is a dreamer, like George, like Gatsby. And Dunk is like Forrest Gump in that he sort of Mr. Magoo's his way to great success. Thank you, Sir Duncan the Average, who says, Rhaegar is my favorite from the story as well. Glad to hear other people love him. Rhaegar is fascinating, and in theory, Rhaegar should be a major character in the upcoming play, The Mad King, that is coming out this year. So I'm very, very curious to see what this play reveals about Rhaegar, and about Aerys, and about Ned Stark, and Brandon Stark, and Benjen Stark, and Lyanna Stark, and Howland Reed, and Ashara Dane. I'm fascinated to see this play, although I did kind of hope that I would be learning these things in a book rather than in a play. And I also think it's going to be weird. It's going to be weird when this play comes out, and most people can't see the play because they're not in England, and so a lot of most Game of Thrones fans won't get to see the play, and they'll just hear about the play through the daisy chain, through chat, and I don't think that's the best way to experience a story. Clexton says, will you attend the Mad King play? I hope so. I hope I will. I'd love to see the play, and I'd love to make videos about it, so we'll see what happens. I hope that they make a recording of the play, so that more people can see it. I think I've had rants before about how, I think that obviously theatre is wonderful, but I think that it's unfortunate that 99.9% of people can't see theatre. People put on this wonderful performance, they make this beautiful piece of art, and 99.9% of people can't see it. And I think that's unfortunate. And I would like it if people made it more possible to see theatre by recording and releasing recordings, but that's just my opinion, man. Thank you, Never Knighted, who says, hey, Chicken Shiftsnull. Wonder how they'll end the season, if Makeup will be brooding or will be trying to find Egg. I think that Ira Parker in the official podcast this week said that there will be consequences to Egg running off without Makar's permission. So, yeah, I imagine they will address Makar somehow. Thank you, Dallas and Aubrey, who says, my girlfriend was wondering if you've read any fan fictions. She said they have some interesting ones out there. Thought about writing my own, centered around a Blackwood-Bracken conflict around 248 AC. It would be cool to add to gaps in the lore. I have not read a lot of Ice and Fire fan fiction, but I think that writing is cool, and there is lots of space to play in these stories, because, I mean, there are lots and lots of eras of history and lots of characters that have a lot of stuff that's unknown about them, and so it's really interesting to imagine what happens in those eras and what happens in those gaps in the stories, and especially when George Martin has not yet written all the stories that he wants to write. Yeah, it's kind of fun for fans to do that. George Martin has said in the past that he disapproves of fan fiction, and he reckons it's better to make up your own characters if you're learning to be a writer. But I'll tell you a secret. I'll tell you a secret. George Martin can't stop you. If you can write whatever you want, you can write whatever you want, and that's what's magical about writing. You can write about, Duncan the Tall making out with Ron Weasley on Hal's moving castle, and George Martin will not burst through your walls like the Kool-Aid Man. I think it's unfortunate that we live in a world where big corporations own most of culture. I think it's unfortunate that we're not allowed to freely create with all of the characters and stories that our culture is centered around. I think it's unfortunate that most of our culture is owned and controlled. That wasn't true in the past. No one would sue you if you wrote a story about Thor or Gilgamesh in the past, but we live in a different world now. Make what you want to make. Thank you, Quantum Khaleesi, who says, "Hi, Shifty. I've seen a lot of comments of people complaining about the writing being too slow for both A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms and House of the Dragon. But honestly, I think a large part of it is people's attention span being short these days. Thoughts?" Yeah, I guess those shows are sometimes slow. I've heard it said that people's attention spans are shorter. Kids these days are watching TikToks instead of reading books. But clearly there's a lot of people enjoying the show. So I'm glad people are enjoying it. And it is an interesting format for the show, being like 30-minute episodes instead of 50-minute episodes. I mean, for one, I'm glad that they didn't try to stretch it out too much, you know? I mean, honestly, this book could have been a movie instead of 6 30-minute episodes. But I think what they did with it is cool and interesting and creative, and it works. And I hope they continue to do that in future seasons. Thank you, Lawrence. Lawrence, who says, "So Northerners don't participate in knighthood?" Yeah, so knighthood is more of an Andal culture, and the Northmen are not Andals, the Northmen are First Men. But, you know, there is some cultural exchange between the North and the rest of the realm, and Bran Stark wants to be a knight. So, and you know, there are northern knights like the Mandalese. There are some Mandalese knights. I think the Mandalese are Andals from the south, just like how the Blackwoods are First Men from the north. There is, you know, it's not a hard line. It's a blurry line. And so there are some northerners who do participate in knighthood, but it's less common. And the Northmen don't participate so much in tournaments and knighthood and chivalry in the same way, but it's not an absolute rule. Thank you, Anit Gone, who says, "Love your content. First learned about R+L=J through your channel. Hoping we get long hair Dunk next season." Yeah, I have seen reports that Dunk will have long hair in season 2, which is delightful. I don't think the books ever say how long Dunk's hair is. I'm not going to look it up because it's not important. But look, Peter Claffey looks good with long hair. Thank you, Vagemasaurus Rex. Vagemasaurus Rex, really? Who says, "Was the fortune teller possibly a red priestess? Where do you think Melisandre is during this time?" Yeah, so Melisandre, at least according to her actor, Carice Van Houten, is hundreds of years old. So Melisandre is somewhere right now. Maybe she's that fortune teller who told Duncan Egg's fortunes and said Egg would burn in a fire. I like the idea that the fortune teller is Bloodraven, because Bloodraven does take on magical disguises and say cryptic stuff to people, and the fortune teller did have a suspicious red mark on her cheek, like how Bloodraven has a birthmark on his cheek. So I like the idea that she's Bloodraven, but I think they can just leave it ambiguous. I don't think they need to answer that mystery. Maybe the fortune teller just is the innkeeper and she enjoys dressing up as a witch. Who doesn't? Thank you, Octavius Caesar Salad, who says, "Is it possible that Lionel Baratheon is going to be at White Walls? He's talking awfully treasonous." Yes, well, we won't get into spoiler territory yet, but Lionel is certainly being treasonous. And there are other people out there in Westeros who want to bring down the Targaryens, so maybe Lionel will look for some fellow traitors to hang out with. Thank you, Stymie, who says, "If I wrote Game of Thrones, Jon Snow's name would be Dagon Targaryen, and his son would be Edgar Targaryen, just to put things right." Thank you, Chorney, who says, "What do you think about the idea that another reason Baelor joined Dunk? Because the idea of a trial of 7, that is basically the crown versus not the crown, and potentially losing, would be really bad optics. It makes it look less bad if they're on both sides." Yeah, I think that's an interesting idea. Like, because the Targaryens came to Ashford to try and, kiss hands and shake babies. They were trying to make friends. This was a diplomatic mission, relationship building. They want people to like the Targaryen government. And it would be bad if there was a trial of combat where Aerion and Maekar and Daeron Targaryen lost. It would not be a good look for the Targaryens to look weak in front of the realm. And yeah, you're right, having Baelor on one side means that no matter who wins, a Targaryen will be on the winning side. And I guess that's arguably good for the narrative. But in the same way, it also means that whoever wins, a Targaryen loses. So it's kind of a bad look. And obviously Baelor's death is like the worst possible look. And his terrible optics. So, like, really, I think if the Targaryens were smart, they would have not fought this trial. The whole trial was a bad look. I think that, Baelor didn't want the trial. Dunk didn't want the trial. The only person who wanted the trial was Aerion and Maekar. If Aerion and Maekar weren't so proud and angry, then it wouldn't have happened. And the Targaryens would be better off, and Dunk would be better off, and Baelor would be alive. So it's really a story of Aerion and Maekar's dickishness leading to disaster. Thank you, Duke the Duck, who says thank you for your Ice and Fire and Dune content. Thank you, Duke. There is more Dune videos coming. Thank you, Stansky. We'll answer that at the spoiler zone later. Thank you, Braundo, who says, before Dunk nails the penny to the tree, there are flies buzzing around him. I think Lionel's maester was right, and his wound is festering. Maybe. I mean, there were flies buzzing around him earlier, and they said that's because Dunk stinks. They were saying that Dunk stinks and needs a bath in the first episode, so maybe he's starting to stink again. They also said in the behind the scenes that some of the filming in the Ashford set was beset by wasps. Apparently there were zillions of wasps buzzing around the actors while they were trying to film the trial. Partly because they were using this fake blood, and the fake blood was sweet and sugary, so it attracted wasps. So maybe the flies weren't CGI. Maybe there actually were insects buzzing around Dunk, and they were wasps, but they added like fly sound effects to make them just look like flies. Thank you, Jess Just Kidding K, who says, I think a few of my super chats got lost. They haven't shown up. I will refresh the windows and try my best to find them. Valar says the same. I will refresh and try. Thank you, Jesse, who says, do we think anybody was the voice in Bloodraven's dreams, calling him north of the wall, like he did with Bran Stark? Surely something must have been calling him. Yeah, so Bran Stark goes north and becomes a magic tree boy because he got visions from the Three-Eyed Crow, or the Three-Eyed Raven in the show. And the Three-Eyed Crow is Bloodraven in the books. And there are also theories that Euron Greyjoy might have gotten visions from Bloodraven, and that Bloodraven tried to get Euron to become his Padawan, but that ended badly, and Euron joined the dark side instead. I think that that's probably actually true. So yeah, if Bloodraven calls Bran, who called Bloodraven? I think that it could just be the trees, it could be the Children of the Forest, it could be some prior Greenseer. I mean, they call Bloodraven the last Greenseer, so, there were Greenseers before him. I think it's an open question, like, do the Old Gods and the Children of the Forest, do they need a human Greenseer in the network to, like, interface with humans better? Or were the prior Greenseers Children of the Forest? It's an open question. I think that it's really interesting to read George Martin's short story and 7 Times Never Kill Man, because I think that whole story of the Gene Shi and the pyramids giving dreams to humans to manipulate them is like the same thing as what's happening with the Old Gods in Game of Thrones. I think that these non-human magical forces are manipulating humans in ways that might not be good for the humans. I think that Bloodraven and the Old Gods might want to eat Bran, and I think that he might resist that. I think there's some really interesting ideas that he's playing with. It's interesting that Quaithe appears in Daenerys' dreams, like how Bloodraven appears in Bran's dreams. And I think that Quaithe is doing that with glass candles. And I also like the tinfoil theory that maybe Quaithe is Shiera Seastar, and Shiera Seastar was Bloodraven's lover, and maybe they're working together. And maybe they're guiding Bran and Jon and Daenerys as part of some grand mystic plan that I hope that Jon and Daenerys and Bran will ultimately reject. Because I think that this story is not about magical puppeteers manipulating everyone for the greater good. I think it's a story about heroes making their own choices for the greater good, So it's all terribly mysterious. We talk about some of this stuff in the Bloodraven video on Alt-Shift-X if you're curious. But it's lots of interesting questions yet to be answered. Thank you, Never Knighted, who says, if you have seen Glidus and Swift's character alignment, I wonder if they would make any changes to characters like Arlen, Makar, Lionel, and Raymond, who we got to see much more of in the show. Yeah, I think on Ultrift X or Glidus's YouTube channels, there's a live stream where they talk about the D&D moral alignment of these different Dunk and Egg characters. And yeah, I mean, certainly these characters are different in the show compared to the book, so I'm sure Glidus and Shrift could do a whole other live stream talking about whether these show characters are chaotic or neutral or lawful or good or evil, etc. I'm sure Glidus and Shrift will do more Dunk and Egg streams in the future. Thank you, Malakadadad, who says, thank you for your coverage of this first season. God knows I've done my fair share of watching hundreds of slightly different worded Game of Thrones tier lists. My love is rekindled. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Thank you, Meowzebub, who says, George, I have upsetting news about fanfic and Bloodraven. Is there lots of Bloodraven fanfic? Is there fanfic about the incestuous throuple between Bloodraven and Shiera and Bittersteel? There are a lot of weird incestuous thruples in this series. Thank you, Lawrence, and thank you, Justin Wang Powell, who says, Arlen never knighting Dunk due to a fear he'd be alone and putting it off until it was too late feels like a parallel to George Martin never finishing Ice and Fire because it would be over. Thoughts? Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I don't want to speculate too much about a real life living person and his thoughts and feelings, but George Martin has, it's been a lot of years since George Martin has published a novel, and George Martin keeps saying that he'll finish The Winds of Winter, but he's been giving the same progress update, 3/4 done, for at least 3 years now. And so I think you certainly can draw parallels between George and Arlen, because because it remains to be seen if George will finish his stories, and I think that George, it would be very hard for George to admit that he won't finish all the stories that he wants to finish. I think that's a very tough thing to admit, and so I wonder if that day will come. And I wonder if Ira Parker had that in mind when he was writing that scene with Arlen. I wonder how George feels about that scene with Arlen. I'm intrigued. Thank you, Jenny of Coldstone Creamery, who says, I loved the shot of Dunk and Egg travelling on at the end, but got stuck on seeing Arlen's ghost on Sweetfoot, who should be alive and well snacking on green apples. Raymond? That's a good point. At the end of the show, we see Arlen riding off to the west, off to the afterlife. But he's riding Sweetfoot, and Sweetfoot is alive in Raymond's care. So how are we seeing the ghost of a horse that is alive? I guess that is a bit metaphysically inconsistent, isn't it? How do ghosts work? I think the answer is don't think about it. But I guess what you're suggesting, Jenny, is that Raymond immediately accidentally crashed Sweetfoot into a tree and Sweetfoot died. And maybe that's how Arlen is riding Sweetfoot. Maybe Sweetfoot died off screen. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Sweetfoot died on the way back to her home planet. That would be the saddest thing ever. It's like the trope of the cop dying on his last day before retirement. Sweetfoot dies before she gets to have her retirement on the apple farm. That would suck. That would be so sad. Thank you, PKE544. Who says, happy 10th. Yes, it has been 10 years of doing videos about every episode of every Game of Thrones show. Thank you. PK says, thank you for your company this season. Do you like the mostly faithful adaptation, or would you have liked it if they expanded it more? I liked it how it is. I like it how it is. I think that almost all of the additions and the expansions that they added that weren't in the book, I think most of them are fantastic. I do not think that they needed to expand it more. It's already expanded a lot. I think they did a good job, and I hope they continue to do a good job in future seasons. Thank you, Lawrence, who says, Gwynspiracy theory. Gwyn is whispering in Bloodraven's ear, a la Eren Yeager. Well, we do have a video about Attack on Titan on the AltShiftX Nebula. I'll add a link in the description, but if you sign up at nebula.tv/AltShiftX, I do ramble about Attack on Titan for a bit if you're interested in seeing that, and signing up to Nebula is a good way to support AltShiftX. Okay, some of you have said that some of the donations are not appearing, so I'll try and find anything that's missing, although I do not see them. Meowzelbub clarifies that Bloodraven is like Elric. And Maxwell says that Super Chat's disappeared, been around since season 6. Thanks for your humor and insight. Got me through school twice with a greater love and appreciation for A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't see where all of the Super Chats are, so I apologize if I have missed any. I think it is time to enter the spoiler zone. In the we've been streaming for 3 hours, so let's go to the spoiler zone. In the spoiler zone, we may spoil future episodes of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. Stansky says, do you think that Aemon counted the votes at Aegon's Great Council? So, spoiler warning, Egg becomes king. Years from now, Valar dies soon, and King Daeron dies soon, and then Prince Maekar becomes king, and then he dies in a battle, and then there's a whole succession kerfuffle. They hold a great council at Harrenhal, and Egg is chosen, but isn't that about... Yeah, so there's a different great council at Harrenhal where they choose Viserys as heir to the throne instead of Laenor in the 101 council. And that's the council where it says the Maesters never revealed the tally of the votes. And so it sounds like there may have been some Maester mischief at that Great Council. With the Great Council that chooses Egg, I don't think there is evidence of Maester mischief in the books, but, there is all sorts of shenanigans that happens, like a Blackfire turns up and says, I would like to be king, and then Bloodraven cuts off his head. There's all sorts of shenanigans that go on there. But yeah, I mean, if Maesters count votes at Great Councils, then yeah, I guess it is plausible that maybe Aemon, as a Maester, was involved in the counting of the votes, and maybe Aemon might have mucked with the votes to make sure that his brother Egg became king. I guess that is plausible. I mean, Aemon counted the votes when Jon Snow becomes Lord Commander of the Night's Watch in the books. So it's not the first time Aemon's been involved in an election. And I believe Aemon casts the final vote that gets Jon elected Lord Commander. So yeah, I wonder. I mean, I think that George probably hopes to write a Dunk and Egg book about the council where Egg becomes king. So I'm sure there's interesting ideas about what's going on there. Because like the story is that, the realm was trying to decide who would be king. And many people didn't want Egg to be king because Egg grew up with Dunk, living the life of a hedge knight squire, living like a peasant, and so they didn't trust him because he acted like a lower class person who believed crazy things like people should have rights. So that's why they were reluctant to choose Egg, and they tried to choose Aemon, but Aemon refused because he was sworn to the Citadel as a Maester, and then later also sworn to the Night's Watch. What other spoilery questions? Yeah, so Lionel Baratheon in this show talks about how there's a war coming and we should get rid of the Targaryens. And spoiler, in book 3, there is a second Blackfire rebellion where a bunch of discontent lords like Gorman Peak and Butterwell and Frey get together and try to install a Blackfire as the new king. And yeah, I think that it is entirely plausible that Lionel Baratheon might want to get in on that action. Lionel Baratheon of the show seems to be a bit treasonous and might want to be involved. But it also is possible that Lionel might not have much faith in John the Fiddler, in Daemon II, so maybe he won't. Because, I mean, if Lionel is at White Walls in Season 3... there would be consequences for Lionel if he participated in the treason. I mean, maybe he weasels his way out of it. Maybe he doesn't get implicated in the rebellion. But I think it would be a bit of a big change to have Lionel Baratheon involved in the Second Blackfire Rebellion. And there is like a later rebellion by Lionel when he rebels against King Egg after the marriage alliance falls through. So there is a different story about Lionel's rebellion that is coming later. But of course, that wouldn't be until season 6 or 7 or 8 of this show if it goes that long. So I think Glidus speculates about this in Dunk Time on Nebula. They are introducing this idea of Lionel's rebellion early, so I do think it's plausible they might have him involved in some of those events. Thank you, Josh, who says happy to contribute. Yeah, thank you for everybody for your donations. I apologize if I miss anything. Valar says not just super chats, a bunch of SL chats too. I apologize if I've missed anything. Thank you, Jess, who says, do you think that Red being pregnant with a child that isn't Raymond's is foreshadowing for one of Egg's sisters being pregnant with Dunk's child, but passing it off as Lord Tarth's? Egg's sisters being pregnant with Dunk's child. Well, yeah, I think that, like, with that whole question of who will be Dunk's child, who will be Brienne's ancestor, is like, will people know that the child is Dunk's, or will people claim that the child is Lord Tarth's, and that's how Dunk's seed ends up in the Tarth family? Yeah, I think it's a decent idea that maybe people will pass off the child as a Tarth child when it's actually not. It's Dunk's child. But the other possibility is that Dunk hooks up with a Tarth, or the other possibility is that Dunk's child hooks up with a Tarth. So there are ways for it to happen without anyone having to lie about the parentage. Thank you, Radam, who makes a joke about George Martin finishing. And thank you, Ironforged. Thank you, Lewis, who says, do you think the couple standing next to Aegon and Maekar at Baelor's funeral could be Aerys and his wife, Eleanor? I think that the old man and the older woman, I think they are too old to be Prince Aerys and his wife, Eleanor. So I think that it's more likely that those older blonde people are bastards of Aegon the Unworthy. I mean, they're probably someone important because, like, the old man is wearing some pretty fancy clothes. So I imagine they're part of the royal family, but I think they're too old to be Aerys. Although, I mean, Maekar looks too old in this show, older than he does in the books. So maybe Aerys does look like an old man. That's what decades of spending too much time indoors reading books will do to you. Thank you, insert name here, who says, I hope that Maekar's search for Egg isn't just swept under the rug and ignored next season. Yeah, well, the showrunner Ira Parker said in the podcast that there will be consequences to Egg running off without Maekar's permission. So yeah, it is a change, but it sounds like they will address it somehow. Thank you, Jesse, who says, do you like or dislike the shows giving explicit answers to ambiguous or unanswered questions, like Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy or Dunk being knighted? Yeah, it's a weird situation. I mean, in an ideal world, George Martin would have finished his book series before the book series were adapted to TV. It's a weird situation where we've got 3 TV shows adapting 3 unfinished book series. I mean, House of the Dragon is kind of a finished book. But it is still very weird. And I think that what's going on here is that we're getting answers in the shows to stuff that George wants to reveal in books, but George may not reveal in books because he may not write all of these different books he wants to write. So I don't think it's not the situation that anyone wanted. It's not anyone's ideal situation, but we are getting answers and George's stories told that otherwise might not be told. I mean, like with Dunk and Egg, like George wanted to write 12 Dunk and Egg books. It might be instead that we get a bunch of seasons of this TV show telling George's stories instead of books. Personally, I would have preferred books, and I think George would have preferred books, but I think that this might be what we're getting. So, it's bittersweet, ain't it? Jesse says, looking forward to the Real Dune Part 2, hopefully before the House of the Dragon Season 3 cycle. Yeah, so one of the goals this year is to finish a bunch of big Dune videos, including the Real Dune Part 2, analyzing the Dune Part 2 movie by Denis Villeneuve. I want to get that out before the Dune Part 3 movie comes out later this year. Thank you, Romaboo, who says, are Green Apple Fossaways just Dondarrion bastards? Yeah, so Red says that she's pregnant. And Red says that she's pregnant with Raymond Fossaway's child. How could she know that she's pregnant? How could she know that she's pregnant with Raymond's child? Red has been having sex with Manfred Dondarrion lately. Well, presumably. Well, yeah, no, it has implied to be having sex with Manfred Dondarrion. So, like, maybe it's possible that she's pregnant with Manfred Dondarrion's child. Maybe Raymond will be a bit puzzled if Red gives birth, like, 7 months from now, you know? It might not be Raymond's baby. So, I don't know. That's a big open question. It would be kind of funny if the Green Apple Fossaways were Dondarrion bastards and not of Raymond's blood at all. Thank you, Nitra, who says, why doesn't future Bran show us season 2? Yes, why can't we simply use time travel to see the next season of the show early? I wish we could. Thank you, Jess, who says, such an interesting contrast between the way Maekar manhandled Aerion a few episodes ago versus what I saw as a gentle hand on Egg's shoulder in this episode. Yeah, like in the scene with the lords at the table, Maekar like grabbed Aerion by the scruff of the neck and dragged him bodily away. Maekar was physically rough with Aerion, whereas in this episode, Maekar is a bit more gentle when he just places his hands on Egg's shoulders. And like, given the situation, it would be pretty fair for Maekar to be a bit more rough with Egg, because Egg is holding a knife about to murder his brother. Like, in that circumstance, it'd be like, whoa, like, have I got to like disarm Egg? Have I got to like grab him and haul him away? Like, that was an intense situation that might have called for a more intense physical reaction. But no, Maekar was quite restrained, wasn't he? I mean, maybe on some level, Maekar is like, ooh, yeah, it might be good if you kill Aerion. Like, Maekar might be thinking, like, I feel you, Egg. Like, I mean, Maekar has got to sympathize with Egg a bit, right? I mean, surely Maekar knows or has heard some inkling that Aerion was abusive to Egg. You know, like, I think Maekar must sympathize with Egg to some extent, and maybe that's why he's relatively gentle. It's such a dark, tragic moment, and it's not in the books, and I think that it's powerful. Thank you, Rosamund, who says, will we see King Maekar in the series? So yeah, spoiler zone, spoiler warning. Maekar becomes king later on, and yeah, I mean, theoretically we could see King Maekar. That doesn't happen until after the published 3 Dunk and Egg books. That would have to happen in A Night of the Seven Kingdoms season 4 or 5 or 6, and who knows if that will even happen, but I hope so, and I hope that Sam Spruill comes back to play King Maekar. That'd be really cool. I suppose there could be a whole season or story about the Peak Uprising, when Gorman Peak rebels against the Targaryens and ends up getting Maekar killed. Thank you, Izar, who says, Shift, what do you think about how all the people seemingly not liking Baelor, to the point that no one attends his funeral or cares that he died? Well, Baelor is said to be popular in the books, though some people dislike Baelor for his Dornish features. But Baelor canonically has some fans. There are Baelor stands in Westeros. The funeral was small. I speculate that it might not be like the proper big funeral. I imagine that funeral in this episode might be more of a little cremation ceremony, and there'll be a bigger funeral at King's Landing. Guess he was the heir to the throne. He's King Daeron's son. Surely there would be a big event. So maybe there'll be a big proper funeral at King's Landing later. That's kind of my headcanon. Thank you, Coco, who says, did you catch Dunk looking to the side at Arlen's ghost riding off? Yeah, I mean, I suppose that Arlen's ghost, it might be Dunk's imagination. Like, after Arlen's scene with Dunk, the flashback to Arlen and Dunk this episode, it cuts to Dunk looking thoughtful, and so I think that scene is Dunk remembering, Dunk flashing back to that moment. And so, you know, Arlen is on Dunk's mind throughout this episode, and that's why Dunk insists on living like Arlen. And so when Dunk looks off and sees Arlen's ghost, I think that's his experience and his emotion and his memory, thinking of Arlen as they're riding off. Thank you, Kermit, who says, what thoughts have changed for you between early access and this second time watching? Yeah, so we were lucky enough to see this season before it aired, which was really helpful. And what are my thoughts that changed? I think that, well, I think one of the differences is that when I first saw episode 4, I was a little less enthusiastic about episode 4 because I felt like episode 4 didn't have as much of like a thematic center or a like thematic like character arc to it, because like, you know, episode 1 was very much about Dunk creating his identity as Sir Duncan the Tall, and episode 2 was more about Egg, and episode 3 was more about Egg. Episode 2 was more about Arlen. Episode 4 was kind of about Baylor, but like to me, episode 4 felt a little less centered. It felt more like sort of Dunk has one conversation, then another conversation, then another conversation, and it didn't quite have as much of a drive behind it, was my initial feeling. But when episode 4 came out, everyone loved episode 4, and I think the wave of enthusiasm kind of convinced me as well that episode 4 was pretty great. But yeah, I'd have to think about what else changed in my assessment of the series. But, you know, I'm glad everyone's enjoying it. Thank you, Jess, who says, there's a trend of houses continuing without the blood of the house they claim to be from, like Elena with Ossifer Plum. Yeah, there's lots of houses that claim to be from a certain bloodline that actually aren't of that bloodline, and that happens in real life as well. I think that, you know, part of the point is that bloodlines are nonsense. Like, you can say that, this is the true bloodline descending back from Garth Greenhand, and, our blood is pure. You know, the Targaryens believe that we are superior. We have the pure blood of the dragon. But if you actually look at the family trees, like, Egg is, like, 25% Targaryen and, like, 75% Dornish. Because Egg's mother is a Dane of Dorne, and Egg's grandmother is a Martell of Dorne. And if you look further back, like, every time people intermarry, they are no longer 100% anything. And I think that part of the point of the story is that the notion of blood purity is nonsense. And it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you look back at a family tree, I mean, assuming you're not practicing Targaryen incest, if you look back, it's like, you know, you've got 2 parents, and you've got 4 grandparents, and you've got 8 great-great-grandparents, and you've got 16 great-great-grandparents, and you've got 32, 64. It goes further back. You're only 64th of any of your one ancestors that far back. So it's kind of nonsensical to say that I'm descended from my great-great-great-grandfather, this guy. No, you're only like 1/64th that guy's DNA, you know? And in real history, family trees are sometimes more complex. So, you know, I think that the story is deliberately subverting and questioning the notion of bloodlines, which are a popular fantasy trope. Like, sometimes fantasy heroes are powerful and are kings and are good because they are of the correct bloodline. And I think George questions that. Thank you, Sarah, who says, can you shout out my dear friend Michelangelo of House Chiavaci? He's a big fan. He's the type of guy that wears a jacket and carries 2 books in each pocket and plays the violin masterfully. R.I.P. Humphrey? Yeah, shout out to Michelangelo, and R.I.P. Humphrey Beesbury, and R.I.P. Humphrey Harding. We did get to see Humphrey Beesbury's beehive coffin, which was extremely cool. We did not get to see Humphrey Harding's coffin. Do you think it's shaped like a diamond? Like the Harding red and white diamonds? I mean, everyone's got to have a themed coffin, right? Like, who the hell are you if you don't have a themed coffin? Got to have something on brand. Thank you, Silas, who says, Marcus from the Fallout show has many similarities to Dunk. Thank you, Josh Whelan, who says, let's all appreciate this experience in the moment. Dragon sword stories don't mean much in the grand scheme, but they enrich the human experience. I am glad that we are experiencing these stories together. All right, I think that we're going to wrap up this live stream shortly. Thank you all so much for participating. Thank you so much for being a part of this series, this season. We're going to release our edited, scripted, explained video about the final episode soon, hopefully at about the same clip that we've released the other ones, and it's going to be a good time, so make sure you subscribed and press like. If you want to watch Dunk Time, you can do so on Nebula. It's 69 hours of exclusive videos on Nebula now, with Alt-Shift-X and Glidus, also a couple of exclusive Alt-Shift-X things as well, so I'd appreciate it if you check it out. And otherwise, this has been fun. Thanks for being a part of this. I'm happy that there's a good Game of Thrones show airing. I mean, it was rough when season 7 and 8 were airing, and I'm happy that we're getting to enjoy such an unambiguously good show right now. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to everybody who donated and gave super chats. I apologize for any donations that I missed. If I missed your donation, please comment, and I will try to respond to your comment. Maybe put donation in all caps in your comment, and I'll search for that, and I'll respond to all the comments that I can that say donation or question in it. I'll do my best to catch up, so I apologize if I missed your question. But yeah, thank you so much for participating, and it's been real. Thank you again, Schubert Reads, for moderating. Thank you to everyone who supports on Nebula or Patreon, and just thanks to everybody who watches. It's a privilege to be able to do this. So, yeah, thanks so much. And if I missed your super chat or donation, please comment your question and put the word question or donation in the comment, and I'll do my best to answer it. It's been real. Thank you so much. You can listen to these live streams on a podcast feed, ad-free, for free. Link to the Alt-Shift-X podcast feed is in the description. There's that Attack on Titan Nebula video. I'll add a link to that. Check out Glidus's band. I'll put a link to that in the description. And check out Dunk Time. And keep it real. Thanks so much, everybody. Cheers.